Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out cast for, what is this, July? Yeah, it's July 2022. I'm your host, Adam Koralik. As always, this is a Patreon-backed podcast, so you get early access to it on Patreon, as well as early access to other videos. You can support the channel, of course. You can get shout-outs, you can pick subjects, you can even be on the podcast. It's all good stuff, or you can just casually enjoy this when it comes out on YouTube. So thank you very much, as always, for your continued support. In that vein, we have the return of the evil Rob Thanos. What's up, man?
Not much. I feel like I just saw you, because I just saw you.
Yeah, that was weird. Like, at the time we're recording this, we saw each other at the airport, and we were hanging out in Anchorage for a few days, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. It's not important. But what is important is Abdullah returns. Abdullah, welcome.
Hello. Happy to be back.
Thank you. I'm glad we're happy to have you. Okay, so if assuming everybody's good, then I think we'll just go ahead and get into it. Is that all right with everybody?
Let's do it.
All right. So here's basically what's going on. We had, as usual, Abdullah, you get to pick a subject, and of course we have other people who get to pick subjects. And to be honest, one person I didn't hear back from was a guy named Chuck Shaw, just because he's busy, and I just never got heard from him. But Abdullah, you also didn't have a specific subject, so Rob and I kind of came up with two, and then we realized we could kind of fuse them all into one big subject. So this is kind of for both of you guys. But obviously, Abdullah, you're here to actually chat about it. So what we were thinking originally was, there's been a big hullabaloo not too long ago about the Intellivision Amico and how it failed, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But then it kind of made us think, like, is it possible? And I know we've talked about this a bit in the past, but I just kind of wanted to reopen this discussions because there's not going to be people who have gone back and listened to every podcast. And of course, as time goes on, things change. Is it possible any other new challenger to Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo are going to come along and have any sort of legitimate console or threat? And then that made us think, like, well, the Steam Deck just came out. Which would have been what I would have probably talked about with Chuck in regards to that. Is the Steam Deck good? Is it successful? What's it like? So we're kind of combining all of this to basically say, while the Intellivision Amico failed and every other new thing that seems to come out kind of fails, is the Steam Deck the one that will finally succeed? That's basically the elevator pitch of this. And I kind of just want to get everybody's take on it. So who would like to go first?
If I can start?
Yeah,
of course.
Ahead.
All right. As I told Adam when he told me about talking about the Amico, for example, actually, if you don't know this, but we had a convention in Dubai back before the pandemic. It was called Insomnia, and in there I actually met Jason Page and Tommy Tallarico himself, and the guy. The agent of Tommy Tallarico was there, and they promoted the Amico and actually had the logo written in Arabic.
Oh, interesting. Did they have like a mock-up or anything for it, or?
I didn't attend the whole convention to know if they did, but I just had a little talk with the agent, and they said they were very excited for it, and that's the new thing, and I think it was revealed back then. I think it was scheduled to release in October of 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everything took a turn starting from March 2020. Almost everything took a turn otherwise. But overall, I mean, it was a pretty exciting idea. As a video game collector, somebody who appreciates the video game history, I found that interesting. But I didn't find the fact that it is the target it has was going to be really strong. Because if you think about it, the only people that might actually be interested in such an item are those people who have grown up with it, and those people are in their 40s by now, as far as I believe, and or enthusiasts of this. There's no major market that's going to hold up for this. While the Steam Deck, for example, as you said, a lot of companies try to come. The Ouya, for example, they try to come and challenge the big three, yet they still fail. But the Steam Deck seems to have a different route from this, so maybe it's gonna fail or succeed, I'm not sure, but it may, at least if it doesn't succeed, it may hold the value for a while. because of what it does, right?
Yeah.
It relates to Steam, and there's a lot of PC gamers. Unlike, for example, the Amico, where it targeted perhaps historians mostly and nostalgia for people who live there, and most of those people are actually busy with their lives most of the time. But overall, the project it seems interesting, but most likely because of where it targets. They were very excited for it, actually. And I wish that it succeeded, but it didn't, unfortunately.
I think the word that you brought up a couple times, and it really hits the nail on the head, is market. Market. Like, if you're going to be releasing a console in the same environment as Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, I'm talking just home console market. That doesn't even mention mobile gaming and PC. Basically, it's where do you fit? Is there a slice of pie at the table? Is there room at the table for you to sit? And I think realistically, for a traditional game console, I think that's no. If you Abdullah said, you know, the Amico was attractive to fans of video game history, such as myself. If you look at video game history, there has rarely been a console generation where more than 3 consoles have either existed or succeeded in a given generation. What we have right now is kind of interesting in that Microsoft, even though they don't sell as much as the PlayStation, is doing like pretty well. The Xbox is a generally successful console. Like, people buy it. It has a great online infrastructure. It has a lot of games. People really like Game Pass. They're acquiring a lot of studios. So it's a successful thing. Maybe not financially successful for Microsoft. Xbox has never made money on the console before. But I think they're a fairly successful brand. Sony obviously has a track record of some of the largest selling video game consoles of all time in the PS1, 2, and 4. And Nintendo has basically a ironclad grip on young people and retro gaming enthusiasts, as well as kind of crossover appeal with the Switch. So, if you are a fourth console manufacturer, and you're like, where am I going to fit in on this table? You have to ask yourself, well, who aren't they targeting? And realistically, those 3 are targeting pretty much everybody. Now, you could say with the Amico was targeted towards, from Tommy Tallarico himself, was targeted towards young children and families. I don't know a single kid on the face of this planet that knows what an Intellivision is, cares what it is, and would want one over a Nintendo Switch or PlayStation 4. And even then, you have competitors like Leapfrog and other smaller companies doing youth-targeted video games and electronics. So I never even saw an in for it there. Really, it was like something more akin to the Atari VCS than, in that it was going to be like a kind of plug-and-play thing with the Intellivision name on it, maybe a couple familiar titles, but really nothing for children to really look at and say, I want that, because that appeals to me. There was no branding that would really attract them. And then lastly, with the Steam Deck, I think it's interesting that this kind of got brought up because literally, 2 days ago, me and Adam saw a Steam Deck in the wild for the first time. We were up in Anchorage, Alaska, as we mentioned in the intro, and we went to the game room of a guy named Ian who owns a retro game store up in Anchorage. Really nice guy.
Called
And
Ian's
he
Game
had-
Paradise.
I'm sorry?
The name of the store, Ian's Game Paradise. Giving him a
Yes,
free shout out here.
Ian's Game Paradise in the mall downtown.
Anchorage,
And-
Alaska.
And so, yeah, we went to his place. He wanted to kind of show off his collection. And, yeah, he had a Steam Deck there. And I thought it was really, really cool. It's, I know, Adam, you're not a fan of portables. What did you think about it? Your brief impression.
I actually thought it held very nice. It was a very comfortable little device. And trust me, I'll say my piece. But, yeah, my initial impression was, all right, if I liked portables more, I could totally get behind this. But we'll get to it.
What I think the Steam Deck is doing is, one, it has an established name behind it in the form of Valve. And Steam, obviously, being the biggest and most popular game launcher for PC games. It also is looking at the Nintendo Switch and saying, hey, what is the Switch doing? Yes, it has this crossover appeal between console gaming and handhelds, and it's obviously doing very successful, but there are people saying, hey, this is great, but I wish I had something more powerful. The people that... I think there was no coincidence whatsoever that the Steam Deck was officially announced and unveiled, what was it, a day after Nintendo Switch OLED was announced?
Yes, because everybody was hyped for a Switch Pro, and they didn't get it.
Yeah, they wanted a Switch Pro, and Nintendo, which never gives Pro versions of consoles, it's only done it once in its history.
Yeah, I was going to say, they
3DS.
have... Yeah, precisely.
Yeah,
Technically, they started this crap. Just putting that out there.
Yeah. So they're like, oh, okay, well, they're not giving it to you, so we're going to give it to you. I think the strength of its pre-sale and its early kind of onset popularity is strictly because there was no high-end PC, high-end gaming PC portable out there. Nintendo Switch is a capable little device, but is showing its age at this point. The Switch is, 5 years old this year?
Yep.
And even back when it launched, it wasn't exactly cutting edge.
It was just a hair stronger than the Wii U.
Yeah, exactly.
Which in of itself was like a decade behind.
Yeah. So, it's showing its age, so Valve saw they're in. They're like, hey, maybe we could beat Nintendo to the punch. And... also maybe drawn a little bit of that PC gaming and kind of blur the lines a little bit, in the same way that Xbox is really blurring the lines between PC gaming and console gaming with their the way they're developing consoles now and Game Pass, things like that. So, and I will also say, just lastly, before I pass it along to Adam, is that I think a big success of the Steam Deck over something, let's say, like Stadia, which is made by Google as a platform, not a console, but a platform, or something along the lines of Apple Arcade, once again, a platform, not a console, is that those two were tied to streaming the games, and a lack of ownership, really. You're streaming them off servers, and yes, while that is the future of games, without having to download anything, there's limitations in terms of network and, server capacity, things like that. With Stadia, with the Steam Deck, you could download those games that you purchased and you own, and you could mod, and you could expand upon, and you can have them on your little handheld, no streaming required. I think that's a big thing, especially for a portable. If you're out and about and you want to stream The Witcher 3, you're probably not going to have a good enough internet connection. But if you have it downloaded, there you go. So I think the Steam Deck it's interesting to me. I could see myself picking one up, actually. I'm not a big PC gamer, but I do have Steam on my laptop, and I do play a couple PC games, mostly stuff like Age of Empires and things like that. But the Steam Deck is, it's appealing, especially if I could get Xbox Game Pass running on it. Or I can get, RetroArch, all of those emulators running on it. I think that would be really, really intriguing. But I think if there is going to be a fourth console manufacturer that's going to succeed, I think the Steam Deck could be it, but I wouldn't even call it a console manufacturer. I think it's a PC that's being put into handheld form, and it's kind of a crossover with that. So it's not even necessarily really new hardware. I don't know, Adam. What do you think?
Well, okay. There's a lot to unpack here. So, partially because I'm responding to you, but also just kind of my OG take. So we'll talk a little bit of history here for anybody, because Rob touched on this about how there's rarely 3 or more that succeed in a console generation. So, he's right about that, and to the point where I had to sit there and think about it and be like, well, first of all, do you have to define what is a success or not? Would you say the Dreamcast was a success? In the game sense, yes. Financially, obviously not. And then you have...
what I would say, I would maybe tie the success of a console in a previous generation to what does the manufacturer do the following. Like, was it successful enough that it got a follow-up?
Well,
basically.
See, that too is not necessarily a fair assessment, because some companies quit just because their internal reasons change. For example, the AES made money. It lasted a long time despite its absurdity, but they never really followed it up. So it's, that was actually going to be my next point, because if you look at the 4th generation, you can, without dispute, argue that the Genesis and the Super Nintendo were huge hits. TurboGrafx 16, not here, but PC Engine Japan, same console, massive success. Neo Geo stuff, considering what their goal was, it's impossible to ignore the success, but that's 4. But then it defeats that argument as well, because they never made a follow-up unless you include the Neo Geo CD, which was also a 4th-gen console. Anyway, that's like minutia, small, nitpicking type stuff.
Or the Pocket. They did release.
Well, I wouldn't include that, but okay, sure, whatever. Point is, it's rare to see that many consoles succeed in a generation. In fact, I would argue until the 7th gen, until really it all got kind of standardized with the 360, the PS3, and the Wii, most of the time you'd really only have 1, maybe 2. And that would depend on the region you were in. As much as I love the Dreamcast, you can't call it a massive financial success. I like the Saturn, but unless you were Japanese, it was not a hit. Whereas the N64 was basically the flop over there. And you get it. It depends on where you are. But yeah, so the idea is, how do we, these other companies that come along and throw these platforms out there is kind of I'm not going to say a dead idea, but it's a mostly dead idea in the sense that when companies do that now, it's something like the Amico, it's something like the Ouya, it's something like the Atari VCS, where it's, hey, I'm not really trying to compete with the big boys, I'm trying to do my own thing. For all its faults, the Ouya did get released. For all its faults, the VCS did get released. The Amico I'll dive into in just a moment, but most of the time, these consoles that kind of just show up, they completely flop, or they make a little splash and then they vanish. The last one to actually make a legitimate, hey, our hardware is competitive, we're going to actually seriously try this, and still fall on our face completely, was the Nuon. So you have to go all the way back to 2000 for that to be the case. So we haven't had a real effort in over 2 decades. Which should tell you something about how controlled this market is at this point. So you can throw out things like you said, the Stadia, which was not a console, it was a service, and so on and so forth. These are all little asterisks that make these points, but that's where we are as far as consoles. So with that being the case, I don't believe any other company is going to come in and truly make a home console competitor in a traditional sense, the way we think of it. I think those days are very much over. That said, let's talk a little about the Amico and specifically what happened. I have actually spoken to Tommy Tallarico in the past. I think you and I, Rob, we did an early episode of this podcast talking about it, and we only had 10 minutes of material to be like, this is why it exists. He's nostalgic for in television the way that kids younger than him would have been nostalgic for the NES, because I think he's in his late 40s, so he probably grew up with the Intellivision, as Abdullah pointed out, given the age range.
I will say one thing just about that previous podcast mention is that if I recall, and you can quote me on this, I believe I said I would eat my hat if this thing came out. And yeah, it's not coming out.
Yeah, well, exactly. So it whatever. But yeah, so by the way, that would have been nice to see you eat that hat, because I don't like your trucker hat that you're wearing there. But anyway, so I've talked to Tommy a little bit, because after we did that podcast, he wanted to be on and talk about it, and I wasn't interested. Like, it's just like, I don't have any material on this. Like, it doesn't interest me enough. Like, and I do not believe that Tommy was trying to be deceptive. I don't think this was like a Coleco Chameleon situation. I think he actually had like legitimate hope, but he probably massively misunderstood that there was no real nostalgia left for the Intellivision, not on the level that he was hoping for. And then he probably severely underestimated how hard it is to make a product like that. And if I'm going to give him complete benefit of the doubt, the truth is none of us work with him. None of us work inside. We don't know how the sausage was made. And I'm betting that the pandemic, the supply chain issues, all that sort of stuff probably really hindered their plans. And I know, because we were friends on Facebook, I think he vanished because he's probably had too much issues lately. I think like one of his parents just died, and then some other stuff happened. It's like, that's a lot to put on a guy. And so I'm kind of guessing that all led to its failure. Is that necessarily the professional outcome? No. But I'm guessing that this thing is dead, and because of all of these factors. Now, they're refunding people who pre-ordered through things like GameStop, but I think all the Kickstarter backers are just completely screwed. I don't think they're ever getting anything. Where that money
they've cut and run, yeah.
Yeah, where that money ultimately went was probably into a lot of R&D for a product that will never really exist. I don't doubt that there's a handful of units that were built and some prototype stuff, this, that, and the other. But logically, I mean, when you fund something like that, what you're funding is their office space, their time, their research efforts, all those sorts of things, whatever their rent is at those locations. So it's not like there's this pot of Kickstarter money where they're like, oh, just hit refund and everybody gets it back. Like, that money is spent. It's gone. That money you gave them was to provide the environment to produce this product. But unfortunately, this product will likely never exist, except for maybe a handful of units. Because some actually do, but I would bet you those were like the proof of concept units. Maybe a couple of final builds, just because they're like, this is what it's going to look like on the show floor,
but they weren't made in factories overseas. They were made they were prototypes. Yeah, they're hand built here. Yeah,
precisely. And I will say this, like, it's not Tommy's fault that we have just suddenly moved into the era that is the end of globalization networks. Like, that's not his fault. Like, Chinese production of stuff is ceasing to exist. So it's possible he'll be able to resume this in a few years on, U.S., Mexican, or Canadian soil. But that said, that doesn't help anybody in the short term. And it's not, this is a guy doing an indie project. Sony and Microsoft are running into the same problem, and they're not little indie projects. We live in an era now that's ending, and we're transitioning into a new one. And unfortunately, Kickstarter backers of the Amico fell into it. That said, even if it had come out and had been this like really swift, efficient, clean launch, you're still talking about an Ouya-like product. It would not have been successful outside of, the nicheness to the handfuls who care about the Intellivision, and maybe to Tommy's specific base, because he does have one. So it's like, that group would like it, but guys like us would be like, this is like Android games on a little thing. I don't really care. And that doesn't, I don't know how to measure the success of that. If that's all they were going for, great, then they succeeded, or they would have succeeded. But like, to take over the living room, no. And I think one of the problems that the Amico had is that everybody looked at it more like it was supposed to be a real console, as opposed to, oh, look, the NES Classic, but with no nostalgia. Because that's basically what it was supposed to be. So whatever, that's that point. Now, where does the Steam Deck come into all of this? The Steam Deck, to me, is kind of fascinating. Like, I I am not its target demographic because I don't game on PC. I do not support the idea of digital content in games. So, like, I'm not the demographic, but that doesn't mean I don't recognize the obvious abilities of this thing to succeed or potentially succeed. If you have a Steam account, and chances are a lot of you do, the idea that this thing will support the vast majority of your library, as my understanding, it doesn't support everything, but it can kind of be tricked to do so sometimes, this, that, and the other. The idea of having this be essentially your Switch Pro to fill that gap with games you already paid money for, I'm not going to say you own, but because you don't own digital content. I know a million little weirdos are going to tell me, like, it says in Steam's clause, fuck off. It does not matter. You don't own digital content. You just don't. There's many things out there where, like, I assume you guys saw that case recently, like, Apple is in court arguing that digital content is not property. They have the right to take that away. Studio Canal is removing all their paid purchases off like those download codes that come inside movies where they say, like, oh, you own this forever. You don't own it. They're removing those from PlayStation servers. You don't own digital content. It can go away with a stroke of a pen, and just because they claim you have this magical right, that doesn't mean they actually enforce it. That's just how reality is. So enjoy it while it lasts. It will last a long time. I'm not saying this is going anywhere anytime soon. Valve is a very successful company. But I personally can't get behind the idea that I don't own the thing I paid to own. That's all. Now, that said, the Steam Deck, I think, is fascinating because it is so technologically capable and it can run such a wide array of games. And we held it, as Rob pointed out, in Anchorage. It's a very comfortable little device. I also like kind of the open source nature of it, which is kind of the whole point. It's like, the fact that you can, like, run, as you said, like RetroArch and all these other things on it. It makes it, like, the perfect little device to kind of run everything. It's like basically a super beefed up hacked Switch Pro that doesn't exist. The issue you run into is what I've noticed about people gaming on PC, and this is just because we live in this era, is that games require a constant series of updates. And I think the Steam Deck, while it has to be updated and whatever, the idea of doing that constantly on the go, I think, is going to throw people off, because that's one of those things where, the Switch will have updates here and there, but it's usually not like massive ones. And I feel like if you're going to pick up a platform to just be like, hey, I want to game for a few minutes, and then you're like, kind of like, oh, all right, another 40 gigabyte update. Great. I don't know enough about how the Steam storage situation works. I think there's a hard drive built in there. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is.
And I know I read a thing where Valve was telling people don't try to swap that out with like an SSD because that can do some serious damage. I don't know. But yeah, we'll see how it plays out. I think the initial phase is going very well for them for the same reasons I thought when this was first announced, which was obviously Valve has a huge base. And on paper, I think that the concept of the Steam Deck is a great idea. It's like if you're already married to that ecosystem, you essentially are just gaining all that stuff on a portable device. Sounds great. But I think that initial success might be kind of temporary, because to a lot of people getting it, they're all early adopters who already have that infrastructure and that ecosystem. You'll probably get a second wave from people who think, like I was holding out, but now I've played my friends and I think it's pretty good. It's the third wave of like what I would call the casuals, who are just like, this isn't a Nintendo. What is this? And how do I get games for it? Oh, I have to like download them all? I don't know about that. And then that costs additional money, because whatever you're putting into the Steam Deck, if you already have a Steam library, then you're basically just buying the consoles and the games are essentially free. That's not going to be the case for people who haven't already adopted Steam. So we will see how this plays out. I think that it's going to be very good initially, but it will probably taper off at some point. But I give Valve massive credit, because they really didn't do like a metric ton of different versions of the Steam Deck like they tried to do with the ill-fated Steam Box that nobody talks about anymore. This feels like the unrealized idea of that coming to fruition. They actually produce something. It's pretty solid. And hopefully people actually enjoy it. I think it will succeed for a while, but I don't know if it actually is like the Switch killer. But I will say, if anything was a Switch killer, this might be the first time that, or I should say Nintendo killer necessarily. And when I say that, I mean like the first time Nintendo doesn't have the dominant handheld. This is the first thing to have a chance. But it has a very low chance. It would have to be against whatever Nintendo puts out next, because clearly the Switch, just based on sheer numbers alone, has already defeated it.
Yeah,
that's it.
No, I totally agree with you in terms of why something like the Amico, did not fail, did not work, and something like the Steam Deck is going to at least have some success. Whether it's going to dethrone Nintendo is one thing or another. But I just have one last thing, kind of targeted towards things like the VCS and things like the Amico. And you said, let's say in a perfect world, Amico got to launch their system, and the launch goes off without a hitch. Then what? I think so many potential console manufacturers, from Atari to the Coleco Chameleon to the Amico to this new NFT, was it Polarium game console bullshit, look at launching the console as the finish line. No, that's when the race starts. Launching a console, in the grand scheme of things, just to kind of shit out a few few systems and kind of get them out the door, is not that hard. It's once you've released it, how are you going to court developers? What is the advertising going to look like? How are you going to meet consumer demand? What does your overhead look like for continuing manufacturing? What games are going to be on this thing? What about patches? Are you going to be online? There are so many questions that you have to address once your console gets out the door and is launched for it to be a success. Now, the Amico is not going to launch. I could say this, I'd eat this microphone if this thing came out at this point, because it might not have started out as a scam, but now it's effectively a scam. They took your money and ran, and this console's never coming out. The Atari VCS, for all of the shit I'm talking, came out. It came out, and what happened with it? It was in clearance bins after 6 months. And now it's nowhere. And it's not getting exclusive games. It's not talked about. It vanished like a fart in the night. It's gone. And was that a success? No. It came out, but it doesn't mean it's a success. And that's the difference. You have to, just getting it released is just the first step. You have to make it a success, and just by getting something out doesn't mean it's going to be that.
I agree with you, and that's where the Steam Deck is interesting, because it has the capability to do all of that. But maybe I'm just missing it. But if it weren't for the fact that we are already so intertwined into gaming and we have to pay attention to gaming news, I've noticed that I have not seen a single ad or reference to the Steam Deck outside of people who I would expect to see that from. Like, again, we were in Alaska, and that dude Ian, he had one, but he runs a game store. I was at Southeast Game Exchange, and I think I saw one person who had one, and they were just making a big deal out of it. But I haven't seen a single TV commercial or a YouTube ad or anything like that. And it makes me wonder if,
you know,
Valve is coasting or if I just missed it. I don't know. But
I don't think it's being advertised in that traditional sense because it hasn't been released in the traditional sense of, oh, go down to your GameStop and buy one. It's a long pre-order, and because of supply issues and the way that they've released this, it hasn't been just for general sale. It's like you kind of put your name in a queue and you wait in the queue, and then when you're up, it charges your account, and then you get sent one. It's something along the lines of how like Analog works instead of Microsoft or Nintendo. Although, it might be easier to get a Steam Deck than it is a PS5. I don't know. I haven't tried. But yeah, I just don't think it needs to be advertised because the word of mouth and kind of the hype behind the name alone is probably enough. Because have you ever seen a commercial or an ad for Steam itself? No, it's just a program that exists and everybody just kind of knows it. Yeah,
that's true. To be fair, it's integrated into like every game because it's always advertised on them specifically. But I see exactly what your point is. Yeah. It is interesting because like I can easily see the Steam Deck going either way. Like I could see it being a niche thing that only appeals to people who think it's like the greatest thing ever, kind of like some sort of like high-end car. Where people are like who have it think it's like the greatest car ever, but most people are just like it's fine. I'll drive my my Jetta or whatever. Or it could be this thing that just completely flops in a few years. But one thing that I assume is going to be the case with it, and I guess I don't know this about the Steam box. To anybody who actually got a Steam box, does that thing still work? Like, is it connect online? Can you still use it? Does anybody know?
That I don't know.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder if the Steam Deck fails, if for any reason they have to cut support for it, or if it can continue to just function because it's just basically connecting to Steam. Does it have some sort of special situation where it's just useless at that point? I honestly don't know. And that I'm not trying to fearmonger on that. I legit am asking because I don't know. But I think the Steam Deck will be a success for a little while, is my guess. And it's really going to sit there until Nintendo kind of figures out what they're doing, which it's Nintendo. They don't really seem to care what anyone else does, so whatever. But I assume once the Steam Deck is all kinds of... I don't even know if it needs to be hacked, which is kind of interesting. But like as you said, if you can get Game Pass running on it, then you're talking about something that's just like, oh, this is... While it's not Microsoft's, it might as well be Microsoft's new platform. Because you're just putting Game Pass on the damn thing.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if Microsoft works out a deal with Steam. They're very much, in a collaborative mood the past few years. Hey,
yeah, who knows?
Let's what is it going to take for you to put Game Pass on this thing? It's like, hey, Valve might listen. Who knows?
To be honest, that wouldn't really surprise me, given Microsoft's aversion to console hardware, and how they just kind of want to integrate Game Pass into everything. I think I've talked about that in the past. It would have been really interesting to see if either Valve or Nintendo eventually court Microsoft for that reason. The idea that you could just integrate Game Pass into one of them would be a massive move. I almost think it would be more likely to be Nintendo just because Microsoft and them actually seem to get along pretty well, probably just to kind of mutually jab at Sony. Whereas Valve is really Microsoft's only legitimate competitor on a PC. So I don't know if they would do that, but who knows? Maybe they're just whatever, who cares?
Yeah. Abdullah, have you had any experience with Steam Deck? And is it something that interests you enough to possibly buy it?
I'm pretty much on the grounds with Adam here. I mean, it's interesting, but I'm not really interested to buy it now until I see what's going on. I mean, if it's a flop, then it'll go in clearance bins, and then I may buy it. But up until now, I don't think every game runs on it. And it's not that appealing to me because I'm not generally a PC gamer anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me. I'm more of a console gamer.
Yeah.
But I wanted just to point out something about the Nintendo Steam thing. I think Nintendo's model is mostly about they don't care about power as much as they care about innovative side. So even if they do release something or do something about it, maybe it will not be a stronger Switch. Maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe they'll try to adapt something new because they don't tend to compete in terms of power because Microsoft and Sony already dominate those. I mean, I'm not sure if you think that's
yeah,
right.
no, I agree with you on that. But Nintendo has a history of kind of doing all their consoles in families. Once they kind of come up with a successful idea, they kind of run with it. The last family group we had was GameCube, Wii U. We're all kind of a group where, you know, everything kind of worked around that GameCube architecture. And the Switch was like the first thing that, you know, they basically merged. They took their handheld divisions and their console divisions, merged them in one thing, and then they made like the most successful platform they've ever produced. I find it highly unlikely that they won't try to essentially clone and upgrade their own concept. They'll look at the obvious flaws, which the single most obvious one was the anemic hardware. But that said, is that anemic hardware going to be, you know, like a PS5 in your pocket? No. I would bet it's probably, at best case scenario, like a PS4 Pro in your pocket. And even that, I would say, is probably a couple years away. Now, they have to, as I agree with you, because they like to always have some sort of new gimmick or crazy idea that goes with it. That's anybody's guess as to what that is. You know, like, what can they do differently that isn't just, hey, it's the new Switch that's, like, more powerful. There has to be something else to it. And to tell you the truth, I don't know what that would be, but that's also why we don't work there. But unless they just kind of come out with a, you know, relatively low-end idea. Like, you know, the last time they did a truly traditional game console was the GameCube. The whole idea behind the Wii was take the GameCube, make it, you know, upgrade it a little, but, like, let's work in this, like, whole gimmicky concept. Then they basically, the Wii U was like, okay, let's take the Wii and like add like next gen capabilities to it, which ironically would have been previous gen anyway. But they were like, let's do that, and we need something odd, so let's put in this like controller that has a screen in it. Maybe some people will like that. The Switch was like the true, okay, we're just gonna merge everything together. And so if their pattern follows, it'll be a Switch, or I call it that, but really it'll be, you know, it'll be a portable that has docking capabilities for a TV with more capability. Again, I'm guessing PS4 Pro in your pocket, and then some other weird, like, you know, some sort of hook. But we're talking about next platform, not the idea of Switch Pro. Switch Pro, I think, at best case scenario, would be just that. It would be, hey, it's a Switch, but it's got better hardware. That's it. What do you guys think?
I agree. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
so
That's what the model, what they follow.
yeah, I mean, I think Nintendo might look at the Steam Deck and see, okay, so this is a real, as you mentioned, a potential threat to their marketplace dominance. You know, they might look at some aspects of the Steam Deck and say, okay, so what are they doing that might be interesting to our consumers, and make your, like, more of an iterative version, like, of a console upgrade. And they could look at maybe the touchpads on here are intriguing to us, or you know, maybe the type of the type of hard drive that it uses. Who knows? I think Nintendo would be dumb to make a strictly home console only. I think I think that is past. They're never going to not make this console a crossover, a hybrid again. So you might lose a little bit of the innovation on that hand. I don't see it, maybe them diving into VR or something. But you know, I could see it maybe being toned down a little bit more, and maybe finding another way of innovating. You know.
So it's interesting because, I mean, the Steam Deck's obvious big advantage. All right, first I want to slightly disagree with you because it's Nintendo. Any normal company would look at the way the Steam Deck is operating and be like, okay, what's working, what's not? Let's see if we can match that, etc. Nintendo,'s like, they act like they just aren't aware that they have competitors. So I don't know how much they're going to care about what the Steam Deck does specifically, unless it truly is a massive hit and people are like actively just like, I don't care about Nintendo because of the Steam Deck, but I don't think we're going to get to that point. But that said, they could look at it and be like, okay, well, what are the strengths of it? The strengths of it are the Nintendo's weaknesses. One, we already talked about is hardware. Two is basically the Steam Deck is entirely reliant on internet infrastructure and pre-existing game bases. So Nintendo famously sucks at that. Their online infrastructure is terrible. They don't, like from every console to the next, they're just like, oh, we have an entirely new Nintendo network now. And like nothing carries over, and it's always like a huge pain in the ass. They would have to very much standardize that, and I don't think they're going to do it. It's just not really who they are. The one advantage they would really have in that sort of vein would be relying on their own history. So like an updated version, whatever their next console is, could theoretically have, I'm not just going to pitch like, oh, it'll have like a new eShop with every Nintendo game ever made. But like you could lean into the fact that, you could be regularly giving away free, like NES games or something on there. Or they could, I doubt Nintendo would ever be this cool, but it would be interesting for them to like legitimately offer like legal NES emulation and SNES emulation and all sorts of stuff. Just being like, hey, you like those classic consoles? Look, we built them all into this new thing. Plus it's a new thing. Like Nintendo Legacy, maybe that's the name of the platform or something like that. It just like has everything as far as their hardware goes. I mean, obviously for licensing reasons, you can't deal with every single game that way, but you kind of see what I'm saying? Like that would be, if I was going to give it a hook of some kind and I couldn't come up with anything better, and chances are they will, that would be my throw out idea.
Here's what I'll kind of conclude on. I was just trying to think back on like Nintendo's history of hardware and how they have iterated instead of innovated. And if you look at their handhelds, which is really kind of what we're diving into, because that's what we're looking at the Steam Deck as, a competitor to Nintendo on the handheld market. Nintendo traditionally hasn't innovated as much in their handhelds as they have in their home consoles. So let's go down. You have Game & Watch to Game Boy. Obviously, you're talking about an increase in the quality of the screen and the quality of the games, interchangeable games, yes, but you still pick up and play, portability, things like that. Game Boy Color. It's just the Game Boy with color. Maybe a little bit more graphical capability, but that's about it. Game Boy Advance. A little bit more graphical capability, but that's it. Okay, yeah, now we have backlight in the SP model, but that's about it. Then you get that jump to the DS, which was initially going to be that third pillar, but really kind of overtook the Game Boy and became the focus. So that is going to be their focus for portables going forward. The big thing, obviously a touch screen and two screens. So that's a pretty big innovation. But when you jump from the DS to the 3DS, okay, so it's got a 3D slider, but we're going to kind of give up on that halfway through. And it's basically just going to have better graphics and an analog stick and better online infrastructure, but that's about it. So I could see Nintendo having a more iterative successor to the Switch, which is basically maybe your Super Nintendo to your NES, or your Wii U to your Wii, in that, or something along those lines. Not a seismic, massive shift in the way the games are made or delivered, or what things are going to be on there. I think Nintendo, after really 10 years of just kind of treading water and relying solely on their handhelds to prop up their console business, I think they know that it would be smart of them to kind of double down and see, okay, what worked on the Switch, let's keep doing that. What didn't work, let's fix that, or let's expand upon it. Not, let's find a brand new way of playing games. And I think that's very much a Shigeru Miyamoto, Satoru Iwata mindset that I think is might be dying out a little bit at Nintendo. There's a younger group of people leading this company now that are going to be operating a little bit differently, going forward. So I don't know. I think you're probably going to see a Super Nintendo Switch, if the Switch was the NES and this next is going to be the Super Nintendo. I think that's what I'm expecting, honestly.
So essentially, you're just agreeing with me. First of all, yes, it's true. You basically agree with the point that Nintendo does everything in family concepts. They usually do consoles of 3, then they finally change something significantly. So that's point one, because the Switch was the beginning of that new era. And that's what we said before. Yes, they'll probably just do like an upgraded version of it. And that Steam Deck we are debating is basically the upgraded version, just without the Nintendo license attached to it. As for your point about Satoru Iwata and especially Shigeru Miyamoto, let's not forget they've got to be in their 70s, if not 80s, at this point. Like, how old are they? Shigeru Miyamoto's been making Mario games since the 1980s. What?
And the new head of Nintendo.
Oh yeah, right. Iwata's dead. Duh. Yeah, I mean, Miyamoto's still around. He's still working there, but like he's well past retirement age. And so yeah, the youth eventually has to come in and do that, and they're just not going to have the same philosophies. I'm going to be honest, that's the biggest X factor as to what they do. However, the Switch was too successful for them to just be like, and we'll just not do that again. They make changes when there's a failure. That's usually how it goes. And so with that being said, and it kind of feeds right into my point here, was despite you went through the whole like portable history, but you forgot one obvious one. The Virtual
Boy.
Right, and that was after the Game Boy. Now, that was Nintendo truly trying to do something different. They're like, we're going to do this gimmicky type of thing. And what did it do? It was, to this day, is the biggest failure in Nintendo's like home release history. And they probably took a lot of negative lessons away from that. Hence, they're like, okay, just stick with what works. And they only change it up when something fails. That's why, GameCube, as much as we both love it, you can argue it was essentially a failure. For them to come in like 3rd out of 5, losing out to the Xbox, which they didn't even respect, was probably humiliating. Hence, they completely changed their model. Wii U is a flop. Okay, change everything again completely. Now, GBA, obviously a huge hit, but I think they just got to a point where it's like, we need to do something different because everybody's, our competition is doing way more interesting things, and we can't just rely on this forever. But that was probably also, there was clearly a cultural shift at Nintendo around that time anyway. Regardless, I think we're kind of way off track, but to circle it all the way back around, sorry, your Amico is not coming. Realistically, there will never be another legitimate attempt at a home console by anybody not named Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. And the Steam Deck, pretty cool, but who knows if it'll ultimately be successful. Abdullah,
somebody buy us one, or 2, or 3.
No.
Send it into the P.O. box below.
Do not do what Rob said. Don't do what Rob said. That we'll make T-shirts, and that's like the official line. Don't do what Rob said. Anyway, Abdullah, any other final thoughts before we close out here?
Nope, all good. I think we discussed this completely.
All right. Well, thank you both, Abdullah, for picking that subject, and Chuck for picking that subject, and neither of you because I picked the subject, but thank you. So now what we're going to do is move on to a round of shout-outs here. The following people are all Patreon backers that are at the shout-out level. So that would be Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, Trey Wagner. Thank you guys very much for your support. And we are back. We are joined now by Joseph Tamburino. What's up, man? Welcome back.
Hey, Adam. Things have been going pretty good. Glad to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Unfortunately, the universe didn't totally align here. In between the first session and this one, Rob lost power at his house. There's like a big storm going on, so maybe he'll rejoin us later for the next section. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he wasn't here last time when you were on too.
He
right?
wasn't. No.
Ah,
It was
like
just us.
yeah. Well, that made it more fun, admittedly. So we'll have fun without Rob. Okay, so the subject you got to pick that you wanted to talk about, and I kind of I truncated it into what I think you were trying to say, but feel free to elaborate and change that accordingly. I basically wrote out how our collecting attitudes have evolved, and I'm assuming you meant from like childhood to now, but why don't you go ahead and explain yourself?
Yeah, I mean that's a basic idea of it. Like, it was less necessarily from childhood to now, from more than since we started like actively like calling ourselves collectors. Because I wasn't really like game collecting as a kid, or even like in my early 20s. That kind of started like around 2016 for me. I know that. I mean, I was still hanging on to stuff, but it wasn't until like 2016 that I like actually started actively going out searching for games and buying games that weren't like, you know, new games and stuff like that.
See, that's interesting. I mean, I'd be kind of like, is that your whole story? Like, is there more to it? Like, what motivated you to do that in the first place?
I mean, I did always like the older games that I was playing, and for the most part, I mean, I traded some stuff, but I didn't get rid of everything. My sister ended up taking like some of like the old Genesis and NES stuff. But honestly, like one of the major inspirations that actually got me back into it was your channel.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
So, yeah, it's like, I found your channel. It's like, okay, right. Yeah, I mean, I heard about game collecting and stuff, and part of it was also just that, like, at the time, like before that, I wasn't actually like near like a more independent game store, so my options were basically always GameStop and Best Buy, and they are not really like, you know, didn't actually have used games back when I like first found your channel. So I found your channel, and then like 4 years later, when I finally like got a good job that actually paid decently, and moved into a new area that actually had retro game stores near me, I was like, okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna actually go ahead and do that. And now I am giving you money to be on your podcast.
Well, so. I appreciate that part. I'm sorry about making you collect stuff. It's funny, actually. I mean, this isn't the point of the subject, but I do get that a lot. When people are like, "Man, you were a big inspiration," and I'm like, "Oh, dude, I'm sorry." Like, because it's like it would be if you have to understand how it feels from my perspective. It would be like if my whole channel was about like, you know, drinking different types of beer from around the world. Like, that's all I focus on. And somebody's like, yeah, man, I was clean and sober, then I watched your channel, and now I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, oh God, like, I'm sorry. You know, that's how it feels sometimes. People are like, yeah, you know, you inspired me to waste money on an irrational hobby. But, you know, as long as you get joy out of it, that's ultimately what matters. I'm mostly just kind of making fun of myself when I say that, but I am seriously glad that if you consider it a positive, then I'm glad that you got that out of that.
Yeah, I do.
Well, good. And that goes to anyone else out there. You know, if you found that positive, if that helped, great. But at the same time, you know, sorry. Sorry to all the girlfriends and wives of the people that I inspired. Let's put it that way. Now, all right, so I guess I'll tell my own little story there, because I think we come from different backgrounds on this, especially because you said you did this as recently as like 2016, where
I mean, that's when I started, like, you know, seriously collecting, like actively going out to collect. I was still buying older games here and there when I saw one. I was like, oh, I remember that. I never got to actually buy it and bought that, but it was like 2016 was when I was like, okay, yeah, I'm actually going to be a game collector now.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think I ever had that transition. I think I just kind of, I'm not going to say I was always like that, but I just kind of...
What I remember from some of your videos, that does
Yeah, it was kind of just
the case.
It was just kind of a calm evolution, if you will. Really, when I was a kid, like I didn't get game stuff for a long time till like my mom started just giving me stuff, as happens with a lot of kids. But the difference with me was I never got rid of anything. Every time, a new console would come out, my mom was never like, hey, you have to get rid of the old one because it's the new one's turn, or nothing like that. There was no, hey, you got to sell all your stuff because if you want the new one. She understood that was a bad deal. You go to GameStop, well, at the time it'd be like Funkoland. It's like trade away like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars of Genesis games and the console and all that for like $50 in store credit. She would have smacked me if I had tried to do that. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a stupid investment. I understand a lot of people do it because they think that's what you're supposed to do. It's like, oh, it's the old one, or they think there's that's a parent trying to teach the kid lesson about economics. But my mom's trying to teach me the bigger lesson about economics, which is don't waste your money. So it was like, keep that stuff because that has more value than the terrible little low amount you're getting in store credit. I've told that story a million times about how I think it's always kind of a bad idea when people trade in stuff like that. But regardless,
I never traded in entire libraries of games. My sister got the Genesis and the NES as a hand me down, but I was also living with my parents for a while until I was 24, and I was finally able to go back to school. So that and the GameCube and my original PS2 that she got. It wasn't like it was out of my house and I couldn't not play the games, but. I did trade some games that I probably wouldn't have traded now. I don't necessarily remember them, which ones specifically, but I wasn't actively oh, I'm actually collecting all of this. It was just oh, I like the games. I'm not going to get rid of them.
Right. And I want to be very clear about this because I know people do this. Nobody, hey man, I had to do it to get my game console. You do whatever you want to do. I'm simply saying it's a bad investment to ultimately take thousands of dollars worth of content and trade it for $50. That's a bad mathematical practice. But if you want to do that, that is your right, and no part of me disputes that. I remember, this is not about me specifically, but when I was a kid, I remember I had a friend who desperately wanted, at the time, I think it was the PS1. Yeah, it was the PS1, but it had been out for a few years, so it was 98 or something like that. And his parents would not get it for him. So the only thing he had of any value is he had a Super Nintendo with a lot of games. I'm going to say maybe 20, and a Sega Genesis, probably with 30 games. And he took them all over to GameStop, again, Funkoland at the time. And they told him yeah, this is maybe at the time, $50-$60 worth of stuff. And he was absolutely for it. He was like, yep, I have to do this to get the PS1. And even as a kid, I was like, I'm trying to talk him out of it because I'm like, dude, we spent our childhoods playing that. And, that meant a lot to us. And you're going to piss it away for part of a PS1 and you still don't even have the money for it. That's what you want to do. And ultimately,
especially the fact that he was doing it in '98 is also not really good.
Yeah,
it would make slightly more sense if you did it right when it came out, but by the time '98 was around, how old was the PS1? Was 4 years old. I thought.
4 years old technically, if you include the Japanese release date, but. Yeah, so it was, it was out there, and it was dude, we're only a year away from the Dreamcast. In fact, depending on what part of '98, it might have even been out in Japan. So it was just kind of a strange choice. But again, you're a kid. At that point, he would have been maybe 11 at most, and so it's I grew up in a background of my mom made sure I understood that the value of a dollar meant not that you need to go work out in the field all day to understand the value of a dollar, but that you need to not throw away things that are worth more than a dollar. You can't just, not everything is made and costs equal, and you can't take all this financial effort you put into something and trade it away for basically nothing. I essentially, because I was kind of, I'm not going to say prohibited from getting rid of stuff, I was just kind of demotivated to ever do so. And I think I told the story once about, I had a couple games I traded away, and that taught me to never do that. Because my mom, I guess, encouraged me at one point. She's like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Why don't you go ahead and trade away your game? See how that works out for you. And that's when I traded away that Spider-Man 3 on Game Boy, and I traded away the Super Mario 64, and like it was just like, oh wow, what a terrible experience, yeah. And she's like, see, dumbass, it's stupid to get rid of these valuable things for like no money. You got nothing out of this. You got scammed by a corporation. Congratulations. Congratulations, son. Literally, you played yourself. So yeah, that's kind of how it was for me. Essentially, I basically just kind of kept everything, but I never reached a point where I was like, I am now a game collector. It was just kind of a natural, like, everything I got, if it was a new console, I would pick up the games for it, and you would have your little library and so on. I guess if I had to argue, when did I start game collecting in like and that depends on how you define game collecting. I guess I would say it becomes, when do you start getting games not because you're interested in playing that particular game, but because it was a good deal on a bunch of stuff? Is that like a fair...
That would be reasonable, yeah.
Okay, so this is, I guess, the weird story I'm going to tell about when that happened. I was in high school, probably my sophomore year, and I had a friend in freshman year. I'm not going to say his name, but in freshman year, like, his parents had got him, like, everything. Like, they got him, here's a PS1, here's a GameCube, here's a PS2, here's a Dreamcast, here's an original Xbox, here's all this stuff. And he was all about playing all of it, all the games, all the consoles. He loved it. It was just who he was freshman year. Sophomore year, he wasn't my friend anymore. We just kind of drifted apart, as happens at that age. And he had become a completely different person. Like, his whole life was, frankly, getting high and, like, everything else that goes along with that. And it just, playing the guitar, like, that was his new thing. And so one day he randomly messaged me, and he was like, yo, dude, I know it's been a long time. So I'm just going to say this, I need like $50, cause this guy has like this, I don't know if it was like a guitar neck or there's some random thing like that I don't know, cause I don't know music. He was like, I need this thing, but I don't have the cash. My parents won't get it to me. He's like, do you want all my old games? Like, I'll just give them to you for $50. And it was literally like GameCube, stack of GameCube games, Dreamcast, stack of Dreamcast games, PS2, etc. Just everything, like everything he had. And I was like, this would have been like 2002. So it was all relevant stuff. And so I was like, are you sure? Cause like, they're worth more than that. He's like, honestly, if I take it all to like GameStop or whatever, they're just going to give me store credit. And, at the time there was no other real way to get rid of that stuff, for like cash. And he wanted the cash like today, right now. So I was like, yeah, all right, deal. So I drove over to his house, loaded all that crap into my car, gave him $50. And that was that. And that was one of those things where once I got it all home, I was like, well, I have all these consoles. I really don't need these, but, now I have extras. And I went through his games and I was like, all right, some of these I actually want to play and other ones I don't, but I guess I have no reason to get rid of them. And I would argue that's probably where it started. Because from there, only, it's like, oh, there's a good deal on that game. Yeah, all right. I'm not going to play it right now, but I'll get around to it. And, that type of thing. And then where it truly went insane was probably, for me anyway, would have been 2008, maybe 2007, something like that. I just suddenly had this desire to get every single Dreamcast game. Like, I wanted that goal accomplished. It just kind of hit me. And actually, what's stupid? You know why it hit me? I don't think I've ever told this story. I have no idea. There was this rumor mill out of nowhere, because that was it was 2007. And the reason it was 2007 is right around there, Microsoft ended their 360 backwards compatibility program with the OG Xbox on the 360. It ended right then. And at the time, there were some, I guess you would have thought of them as credible, now I think of them as laughable, rumors that Sega was reshuffling things, and the Dreamcast was finally coming to an end in Japan, 2007, also being when its last release date came out, which was a game called Karos. There was this rumor mill circulating that they were going to basically expand Dreamcast backwards compatibility into the Xbox 360 due to a simple firmware update. Now, I know that to be completely absurd now, but at the time, I believed it enough where I was like, damn, if that actually happens, Dreamcast games are going to be really, valuable. This is like my favorite system ever. I'd really like to go ahead and get these. And they were still worthless. Like, nobody cared. So I just started rounding them all up as quickly and cheaply as I possibly could. I eventually got all the way through all the American stuff, and then I thought, well, okay, that was cool. How hard could it be to go after, say, the European stuff? Because I was like, oh, I knew at that point, Shenmue 2 had come out. I did have that one. And I was like, man, that was such a fun game, and it never came out here. I wonder what other fun games never came out here. And so I looked into, I just tried to get some intel together, and I realized like there was a comically small number of European Dreamcast exclusives, and I thought, yeah, I could probably, track all those down. And once that was done, I was like, well, wait a minute, how about the Japanese ones? That was a much harder task, but I did do it, along with all the indies. And then, I kept sitting there thinking like, dude, I did it. I actually completed a Dreamcast set, and to this day, when there's new indies, I'm still picking those up. But like once that ended, it was like, oh, that was fun. What else can I do? And, around then, the YouTube thing starts working, and then, you start finding it more fun to collect for other things, and then it expands. And to this day, like I still don't really get rid of stuff, which is kind of a problem, but I have everything that I've, ever really acquired for the most part. And it's actually kind of evolved into, a change, if you will, over time, because what inevitably happens is unless you buy to flip, which I never do, then once you have a game, you have no interest in getting it again. So if you complete a set, you're like, oh, cool, I guess I'm done with that. So I don't ever have to pay attention to Dreamcast or Wii U or whatever it is. And so I am now, if I fast forward all the way to now, I'm in this weird place where like the way that the current market has evolved for retro games, everything is kind of too expensive to dive into. Meanwhile, the newer stuff that's coming out is not as interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, because, we live in an era now where no game is really done unless it's, like a small indie release type of thing. So the discs are never really the full game. So that can be a little demotivating. But also, every console is successful now. So like the Switch, and when I say that, I mean like of the, now what we would call the big three, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, like they don't allow their systems to fail. So, because even the Wii U, which I would argue was the last failure, lasted, 4 years and had over 200 titles. But, you don't have these like Jaguar CDs that only have 13 games, or your Virtual Boys that only have like 22 or whatever it is. So because those are so big, it's to me an impossible task to try and collect Switch stuff or PS4 stuff or Xbox One stuff, unless you just want specific titles, which ironically brings us back around to where I was when I was a kid. Like, I just want the ones I'm going to play, blah, blah, blah. So then I look at it and I go, okay, what would be interesting is, not collecting as far as full set concept for those, but maybe doing that for some older consoles. But that, too, as I said, has become very difficult because the market is so oversaturated with collectors and everything is much more valuable than it used to be. And so, like, if you want a full GameCube set, like, the number isn't the problem, the money is.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And I also have the unfortunate bug of wanting the international releases, the exclusives. And so that can be fun, by the way. That's a separate, discussion. I like going to other countries. Like, I just got back from Europe, right? And so I was able to track down some stuff there that I would never have been able to get here. And that's fun. That's like a whole new dimension to it. And of course, doing the same thing in Japan or whatever. But where I am now in 2022, in the summer of 2022 as a collector, is I still like doing it, but frankly there's just less stuff for me to get, and there are less avenues to get the remaining things, if that makes any sense.
Like, my thought process, like, as a collector has actually changed a bit since I started in Well, I guess it was actually more closer to 2017 than 2016. But either way, since I started, like, nowadays, it's like you said, the market has a lot more people like me who came in around that time, or more people who are coming in now, or I guess over the last couple of years. The pandemic shot the prices up, like, a lot. But, like, I've also noticed that, like, I'm actually, like, the closest I've ever been to, like, any, like, retro game stores. Like, I could take the bus to one of them in the town I live in, and I could walk to the other two. And I've noticed that as I've been going, I'm just like, I'm not seeing anything I want, or I'm seeing stuff that I would want, and I'm looking at the price, and I'm like, do I really want that, or do I, like, and I'm just like, nah, and I'm just walking out. Like, I've gone a couple of weeks when I've gone into the stores, not gotten anything, and then just, like, walked out. Whereas in the first couple of years, I would basically always pick something up whenever I went to a store, regardless. Even if I didn't find anything that was, like, necessarily a, oh my god, I need this now type deal. Whereas now, the stuff that would have been, oh my god, I need this now, is like, do I really?
Yeah, I see that completely, and I actually feel for you on that, because I'm guilty of that happening to me all the time. And like I said, I think it's just a combination of things. One, we have to throw the elephant, we have to comment on the elephant in the room, which is we're older than we used to be. And that means that we're getting more and more distant from whatever childhood pull, had us do this to begin with. It's like, do I need this? I have to pay property taxes. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's an adult exclusive thought process. That is a part of it. Two is, as I said, if you already have the games, then what else are you looking for? And if you're not collecting, I think another third point is, if you're not collecting for a specific thing, then you're less motivated. So, for example, the last console, I'm still working on it, although admittedly I haven't been doing as great of a job with it, is the original Xbox. Like, I literally want a full set of it. Everything that exists, every region. I've got all the international stuff. I'm still working on the American stuff, but it's like you'll look through sections in a store, and if you're in the right mindset, you're like, all right, let me just grab all the ones I need. And it used to be like that, and it used to be more fun, but that was also when games were like $1 or $2 or whatever. It's harder to justify being like, oh, look, Madden 06 is, how much is it? It's $19.99. I really don't need that right now. You know what I mean? And you just go like, it's not as fun. It doesn't, and you're just doing it to check a box, but you're also doing it on a game you don't even really want. So it kind of fails on a lot of levels, and I think that's where that is, at least for me. Because fortunately, there's not too many like heavy hitters out there that I know I want. There's some for GameCube that I know I'm missing, like Go-Go Hyper Grind or Gotcha Force or Cubivore. Like, I'd love to have those for the GameCube. But aside from some of those, there's not too many out there left for me. Just because I've kind of put a wall on it. Like, I'm not really actively going to get any sort of complete sets for anything that exists beyond the Wii U. Just not. And then the stuff before the Wii U that I cared enough about, I've either done or it's too late. The Dreamcast, I did it, and I did it when no one cared. But like Saturn, it's too late, man. Like, you're not getting a full Saturn.
Also, there's
set.
Too many for what you would want to do, because you'd want to get all the Japanese ones.
Yeah, see, I've thought about that too, and that's like another thing. Like, even if you got all the American ones, which is $244, you could get all the European exclusives, which is $32. Which, incidentally, that I actually did do. I do have all 32 of those. But the Japanese stuff, as you point out, it's like an additional like 1,100 games, and it's like, yeah, it's like, dude, even if I was in Japan long enough and put in the effort and I was just getting those for cheap, it's like, where would I physically put those, you know? And it's, it's, you know, it's a ton of different factors. And yeah, that's the state of collecting. So it's kind of, I would argue that's how the whole process has evolved from beginning to end. At the very beginning, it was about, what do I want to play? And now it's, you know, what do I need to tick a box? And is that worth, and am I still interested in doing that? The unfortunate answer for me is yes, I am still interested in doing that, but it's not quite the same as it used to be. It's good, it's just different.
Yeah, in my case, I just find it funny that I basically like slow down. I'm like, do I really need to spend this much on this when I'm making more money than I was when I started by like a significant margin, where it would have been, yes, I absolutely want that. Goddamn, I want that, but that's too much money. I can't afford that. Whereas now it's like, yeah, I could afford that, but I'm not gonna buy that because it's just like, I can afford it, but it seems kind of dumb to spend that much. Like say, like in 2017, like one of my local game stores I was at had a complete copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga for like $400. I wasn't able to afford that at the time for one game. Now, I could, in theory, actually afford to buy it at the price it's going for, unless if it shot up again.
It's like $1,200 right
now. Why would I spend $1,500 on Panzer Dragoon Saga? I didn't grow up with a Saturn, so it's like it would just be getting it because I would basically be getting it just because it's $1,500, and it's like, no, I could do better with my money on that.
Yeah, I mean, welcome to the collector's burden. It's a financially irresponsible thing, but it's fun. But the problem is when you take the fun element out of it, then what the hell are you doing? And I'm not trying to be down out there, by the way, for everybody. Like, don't get me wrong. I think we both enjoy collecting. We're just kind of analyzing the problems that happen with it as you get older. The normal shift that should happen, it does to a lot of people, is that we all go through this collector's phase, and then a lot of us purge our collections. That's why you go to cons or whatever. There's always some guys like, yeah, the wife made me get rid of it. I got a kid coming. I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, that's completely normal. And that leads to new stuff being dumped on the market, and then it just kind of cycles around and around. But as I said at the beginning of this, I'm kind of the philosophy, like, if I don't have to get rid of that, I'm not going to. And in the long run, I held on to all these things, and now they're all worth way more money than they were than when I got them. So it's an investment, I guess, even though it wasn't exactly... It's not what I intended. My mom apparently had the last laugh on that one in the long run. But at the same time, it's like, maybe one day it's like, okay, things have changed in my life, and I'm sitting here being like, as you point out, let's just use Panzer Dragoon Saga as the example. Like, I think I've told you my story about that. I got that, plus the other two Panzer Saturn games, boxed, complete, in a buy it now for $80 in like 2014. I even did a video on it at the time because it was, even then, was ludicrous. It should not have happened.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, like, yeah, it'd be nice to trade those in and get like $2,000, but do I need that right now? Fortunately, no, I don't need it. Would I like it? Yeah, who the hell wouldn't? But what if I sit on that and eventually that's like Panzer Dragoon Saga is enough that I could trade it for like a Tesla. You know what I mean? Like, what if that happens? And that's when you get to that true maturity adult point where you're like, well, I need a car more than I need this piece of art that I'm never going to play. And we'll see. Maybe that point will come. But in the meantime, it's safe. It's sitting there. It's just accruing value like a stock market item or something. You know what I mean? But not everything does that. And that's when that's where I find it less interesting to buy new games than I used to. Because older games, say, your 6th gen era, whatever it is, when you bought them new, they would nosedive immediately, but they also eventually kind of come back because they're complete games. What concerns me about the modern era is that everything is kind of just partial data on a disk, and everything is also sold through digital distribution, meaning very few of those titles will be rare as far as games themselves are concerned. The physical edition might be uncommon, but, you know, that doesn't mean you won't be able to get the game in some form or some re-release or something, whereas a Panzer Dragoon Saga will be rare forever because the source code to that game is missing. It's kind of depressing but nice at the same time to kind of deep dive into the psyche of, you know, how our personal evolution has gone on attitudes towards collecting. But you know, it's funny. It is one thing, though, that I can say is probably very consistent about collectors is there's all this pride in wanting people to show, or wanting to show people the things you've amassed, but you can only do it to a very specific like-minded individual. So for example, like the place I live in, which you guys is what you see in most of my videos where there's like you know, I'm at that table and everything, that's in my apartment. But in this apartment, like there is obviously a massive video game collection. Now, obviously I've been together with my girlfriend for 8 years, but for argument's sake, let's say she and I weren't together and I was like, oh, I'm gonna try and, you know, hit on a girl and bring her over here. I'd be like, oh crap, this is not a place that you can bring a girl and impress her, because it's like, what? Ooh, look, I've got Panzer Dragoon Saga. She's like, wow, I so don't care. You know, like that would be embarrassing. However, you can not change a damn thing about this place, and I could bring someone like you or Rob over, and you guys would be like, oh my god, this is so awesome. And we would all be like on cloud nine just talking about all these like basically toys on our shelves. Like that's basically, it is just funny because to one audience it would be embarrassing, and to another it's like the coolest thing you've ever seen. So I will say that collectors probably all have that, relatively speaking, in common, to the point where when Rob and I just got back from Anchorage, Alaska, and while we were up there, we went to a store called Ian's Game Paradise. And when we went in there, we were just kind of looking at stuff, and we saw this thing in the window that we were like, what the hell is that? Because we could tell it was a Famiclone, but we couldn't tell, like, it was called like a Max Replay, and we're like, what the hell is that? I've never heard of that brand. And so we were chatting with the guy running the store, and, you know, I was like, do you mind if we look at it? Because, like, this is where we are as collectors. We're not interested in all the normal things you have in this store. We're not even interested in the obscure things like a TurboGrafx 16 with the CD, because I have that. We're interested in the weird Famiclone that we can't figure out the origin of. That probably tells you something. But as I'm sitting there looking at it, I look at it and I see what I thought was Portuguese written on it, and I was like, what the hell does that mean? Is this Brazilian? And then it's all, you know, like I said, I have a girlfriend. She's Portuguese. She can speak the language. She can also speak Spanish. And I was like, oh, I know what to do here. So I took a photo and I sent it to her. I'm like, what is this? And she's just explained that it basically says, you know, don't make sure to put the cartridge in all the way, etc. Just like what you would expect a Famicom to say. But she said it's Spanish specifically. It's not Portuguese, which eliminated Brazil. And then we tried to do some more research, and we found out that that company only ever operated in Brazil and Peru, which meant, by process of elimination, we had found a Peruvian Famiclone, which, as a group, we're like, all right, we all find that interesting. Useless, but interesting. Yeah, and as we're continuing to chat, you know, like, so I was like, cool, man, well, thanks for showing that. He's like, yeah, whatever. And I wanted to pay the favor back, because that was cool of him to just, like, he didn't know us at all. He was just letting us basically tinker with this thing. So I was like, I'm going to show you something cool I've got in the bag here. And he was like, no, I don't want to sound like, you know, I work in a game store, dude. I've seen a lot of things, so I don't think you're going to, like, he basically was trying to set us up not to be, like, expecting that he was going to be excited about what I had. So naturally, then I took out the Sega Pluto, and he lost his shit. Of course. Yeah, well, I had it on. He was not expecting that, because he knew fully well what it was. And he was like, "Oh my god, what is that doing in the store?" Anyway, so we're just talking. I let him see it, take all the photos, whatever. But then, you know, he tweeted about it, and his boss, his name was Ian. He said, "Hey, I'd love to meet you and see that thing." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever, no problem. We're in town for the next couple days." So a couple days later, we came back. We went to the store. I showed him the Pluto. He got a huge kick out of that. And then he was like, I don't mean to be weird here, but if you guys want, this is just, you know, this is my store, but all the good stuff, like my collection, is all at my house. I'd love to take you guys there and show it to you, because you don't get, like, first of all, you don't get like super hardcore retro gaming collectors in Anchorage all that much, especially ones that are walking around with something that bizarre as far as the Sega Pluto is concerned. So the guy says, yeah, hell yeah. And he took us to his house. He drove over there and we walked around and looked at his collection. He had an amazing collection just of stuff. Tons of great consoles. He had, a nice Neo Geo CD collection, TurboGrafx collection, PC Engine stuff, like lots of just really cool stuff. He had possibly the biggest Game Boy collection I've ever seen in my life. He just had a lot of really cool stuff. And so that was just one of those moments where it's like, there are 3 people possibly in this state that would care about this on this level, and we're all in this room, and this is just like cool energy to share together. So you can have those type of collectors, and that's awesome. But on the flip side, there is a second retro game store in Anchorage, Alaska. And I don't even remember the name, and I'm sorry if they ever listen to this, but I'm guessing they never will. It's not worth remembering the name of the other store. So we went into it, and Rob, who actually works in a game store, and he would have told you this had he been on here, he said that type of game store is the worst type of game store, because you go in and everything's like pristine. You know, it's like they have a very nice selection. There's clearly someone involved in this store who likes retro video games and knows what they are and all that sort of thing. But that person does not appear to ever actually work there, because the people who work there have no clue what anything is or what anything costs. So as we're standing in the store, it's one of those stores where nothing is priced, which is always the worst. So you have to manually ask like what everything, like how much everything costs. And so what do? They just go, I don't know. And they take it over and they look at eBay, and then they come up with a higher price than what's on eBay. And you just go like, okay, so no. So as we're standing in that store, we're juggling that with also the fact that they had some like crazy items. Like they had something I've never seen before, an Atari VCS, well technically Atari 2600, copying machine. Like it would take one cartridge and clone it. I've never seen that before. It was I took a photo of it. It's just some device by some company that made it back in, I guess it would have been the 70s. Now, what it would dump it onto, I have no idea. I don't know if they were selling blank cartridges or what the hell the idea was, but that's basically what it was. And I was like, that's cool. Didn't think about buying it, but I was like, that's cool. They had a Nintendo iQ. Do you remember that thing?
Wasn't that the China thing?
Yes. For those who don't know, Nintendo released one console officially in China, mainland China, called the iQ, which was basically a portable N64 that you would just kind of, all the hardware was put into a controller essentially, and then you would just like plug it into a TV. It would be completely irrelevant if it weren't for the fact that Nintendo themselves actually made it. Which is very strange. They even had one game for it, which was Dr. Mario 64. No price on it. So Rob took a shot in the dark because he was like, if that's reasonably priced, I'm buying that. And so we just straight up asked. And the guy was like, oh, yeah, I don't know, man. I have no idea. Because we used to have tons of those, but I have no idea what they cost. And we're like, so can you find out? Like, because that's like your job? Like you work in this store. Like we didn't say it that way, but and he was just like, here, let me give you a card, call us back in like a week and we'll have an answer. And I was like, I'm good, man, it's fine. And then so like, what the hell kind of policy is that? As we're leaving, we're getting ready to go, and I noticed something else I've never seen before. Like buried over one of the counters on the shelves in the back was like 4 Mattel Hyperscans and like sealed copies of like every game. And again, no prices on them. So I was like, dude, I hate to bother you, and I'm probably the first person to ever ask about this, but how much is that Ben 10 game on the Mattel Hyperscan? He was like, the what? And I was like, over here, this thing. And he looks at it, he's like, oh yeah, nobody's ever asked about those before. So he just grabs a copy of the game, and he's like, it doesn't have a price on it, which we knew. And he's like, let me see if I scan it, see what happens. And it would scan. He's like, yeah, it doesn't know what it is. Again, if you give me your number, I'll call you in like a week with a price. And I was like, I'm
How's
good.
that store in business?
I don't know, man. That was our whole day was just that. It was just like everything we asked about, they either didn't know, or if they came up with a price, it was ludicrous. Like, Rob found, he loves sealed Game Gear stuff. It's like a soft spot for him. And they had the Game Gear car charger, like the little portable charger you would stick into a car, like cigarette jack.
Oh.
They had one sealed in the box. The box was beat up, but it was sealed. And so it had no price on it. He pulled it out, and Rob's like, "How much is that?" And he's like, "I think it's like $10, but I have to check because it's been so long." And it was like, okay. And so Rob's sitting there looking online, and he's like, sealed ones are like $60, which he didn't want to pay, but he looked at it. He was like, we'll see. $10, I'll do that all day. Eventually, the guy actually came back with a price. He's like, yeah, it's $80. And we're like, no, I'm good, man. And he's like, well, if you don't want that one, we have like loose ones coming in. There's a shipment of those, and those will be only like $40. He's like, I'm good. It's fine. Like, you have a shipment coming in of Game Gear car chargers? All right. So anyway, it's just never run your store like that. And that's all I was trying to say with all this is how there are collectors that are good, that are super interested in the hobby. And those two stores, they're the only ones in Anchorage. Ian's Game Paradise is run by a guy who's super into that stuff and will take the time to, make sure that everybody kind of has a fun experience. The other one, while it seemed like they had some more interesting actual inventory, it also felt like the people running it had no idea what a game store is. So I don't know exactly what the lesson is there exactly, but I guess what I'm trying to say is not everyone who is collecting in this hobby actually is a collector.
Right.
Some people are doing it simply for the financial benefits.
Yeah, that's definitely it too, for sure. Makes me very glad that I have like 3 retro game stores near me run by people who care, even if one of them's their prices is a bit high at times, but they at least still actually care.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, I didn't mean to derail and talk about stores exactly. I was just trying to make the point that collectors, we're not all the same. But I'm curious if you have anything else to say about like your own personal tastes and opinions, and anything else changing for you, because I think I've kind of covered this for myself pretty well.
Nope, that's pretty much it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Joseph, for joining me. And coming up, we're going to be talking about a lot of Star Wars, particularly Obi-Wan. So I'm just going to say this right now. Spoiler alert. We're not going to dance around it. And we're back. So we've got Keith now. What's up, Keith?
Hey, how's it going? I feel the force flowing through this podcast, I must say.
Hello there.
Yeah, I'm glad you're both feeling that way, because kind of like the beginning of the podcast where we basically had 2 subjects we were kind of fusing together. That's what's happening here. So we have a backer named Spencer Per Year, and he wanted us to talk specifically about Star Wars overload, like how much content Disney is pumping out, is it too much, etc. And Keith, meanwhile, you wanted to talk about Obi-Wan, the new Disney Plus, or relatively new Disney Plus series. So I thought, let's just kind of combine all that into one big thing. Is everybody on board? Does that sound good?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Then I guess we'll just kind of start with, I don't know, who feels like going first? Just lead. Somebody take point.
So, I guess that's me. All right.
That is you.
Okay, so Obi-Wan is... so for a little perspective, I know, Adam, you had even pitched this concept of this show. I mean, it must have been, what, like 4 years ago?
Dude,
around the time that Solo came out?
No,
like,
I pitched this before Solo came out. I pitched it when they announced Solo. I think I pitched this during the live stream for Rogue One that I did. Like, when Rogue One came out, this was... All right, this tells you how Star Wars fandom gets hurt and how there is Star Wars overload, because when Force Awakens came out, I came home, I did a live Q&A just to talk about that movie. When Rogue One came out, I did a live Q&A just to talk about that movie. When The Last Jedi came out, I for some reason felt the need to do a live stream to talk about that movie. Solo, no, and Rise of Skywalker, just hell no. But I remember when Rogue One did come out, during that, it's somewhere in that footage, and it was probably, knowing me, it was probably like a 6-hour stream. But somewhere in there, I talked about the idea of, you know, because they were just announcing, like, Solo was the next one, and it was like, who gives a crap about Solo's origin story? You know, I don't want to see that. What I want to see is Obi-Wan. I want to see what was he doing in between, you know, Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. And I can elaborate on that, but yes, Rob is correct that I talked about this a long time ago.
So, I mean, to that point, this has been a series that the fans of Star Wars pretty much on the whole have really, really wanted. Now, you could love or hate or have mixed feelings, as I do, on the prequels. But I think the thing that everybody agrees that they nailed 100% is Ewan McGregor was really fucking good as Obi-Wan Kenobi. And everybody likes him. So we're just like, more of that, please. So Disney finally gives it to us after all the years of speculation and hints, and you know, we finally get not an Obi-Wan movie, we get an Obi-Wan series, and I enjoyed it. I thought if I'm starting out giving it a letter grade, I'm gonna give it a solid B.
Oh yeah, right there, nice solid B. Okay, I see it.
Yeah, it's the universe is better for having Obi-Wan in it. Is the universe better for having a Solo, a Star Wars story in it? No.
Yeah.
No.
Good point. Yeah.
It is
I
not.
mean, did it add to Star Wars? Added to Star Wars.
I think it added to Star Wars.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was a net gain to Star Wars. Is it perfect? Fuck no. It is not perfect.
No.
I think that this series, it did a lot of good things right. Okay, so what did I like about it? Ewan McGregor is consistently wonderful as Obi-Wan Kenobi in everything that he does. He's great. Young Leia was, I thought, a revelation in this. I loved the young actress. I thought if Carrie Fisher was alive, Carrie Fisher would fucking love this little girl. Playing Leia. She's so full of attitude and adventure, and she's a go-getter. She's like everything that Carrie Fisher was in the role. And I liked that. I liked what little we saw of Hayden Christensen returning as Darth Vader. I think the monologue at the end might be the best thing he ever did in Star Wars.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But so yeah, there. Jimmy Smits' Bile Organa is great. Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, I thought they were totally good. So if I'm saying like all this stuff is really good, I didn't even mind Reva, the third sister. I thought she was a perfectly serviceable Sith Inquisitor. So if I'm praising all this, what is it that I don't like about this? And my thing is that there was too much of it. This should have been a 2.5 hour movie. And this got so long in the tooth, and so many needless episodes in this, that it destroys it from a narrative perspective. Like, okay, Leia gets kidnapped, Obi-Wan has to go get her. Totally fine up to then. Like, they find, like, Darth Vader finds him, they fight, he gets injured, that's all good. But then Leia gets kidnapped again. And then you get this Reva trying to kill Darth Vader by capturing Obi-Wan because she hates him because he's a genocidal maniac, so she's going to be a genocidal maniac just like him to get close to him or something. Like, they just try to shoehorn in too much like extraneous storylines, and like the whole episode of them at that fortress that they have to infiltrate, that entire episode could have been cut and nobody would have known. Like I just really think that some stories are better suited to being told in a 3-act structure as opposed to 15 acts, in over the course of a TV show. It was too much, and I kind of like, I don't know if we're talking about Star Wars overload along with this, and honestly, I'm kind of overloaded on Star Wars TV. I think there are certain things that are just better suited to movies, and this is one of them. And I think you could extend this criticism to a lot of things, including some of Marvel's TV show things, like Falcon and Winter Soldier should have been a movie, and there was a lot of just stuff that could have just been cut out of that. So much so, I think the general consensus of some critics of this are kind of along with me, that there's a guy named something Patterson who has now edited the entire Obi-Wan show into a single 2.5-hour movie, and I think he's like streaming it on his website. I have yet to watch it, but I'm intrigued enough that I'm going to go search it out and look for it. So, I mean, I think that's my biggest problem with it. I really liked a lot of the stuff in this show, aside from shaky cam. Fuck shaky cam. That was my biggest thing about, like, that the lightsaber duel at the end looked really, really good until I couldn't see it because the camera was shaking. Not everything has to be Battlestar Galactica. So no to the shaky cam. Yes to pretty much all the characters and set pieces and stuff, but way too much of it and stuff that is not needed. So,
yeah, I mean, I there's a few minor points that are a matter of opinion that I would disagree with you on, but as a whole, I agree with you. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about like how we got to this point, specifically on Star Wars overload, and how that ultimately is causing the exact problem you're describing. Because, as I mentioned before, when I was pitching the idea that there should be an Obi-Wan project, I meant a movie. Like that's exactly what it should be. And as to your point, there is a 2.5-hour movie in this 6-hour block of footage. It just isn't cut properly into that narrative. Hence, you get a lot of story repetition, things that don't need to exist, etc. There are also, and we can go over this later, there are individual story elements that I absolutely hate, such as Aunt Beru suddenly being like a gun-wielding, lunatic. I was like, where did that come from? She was never particularly aggressive. She just made the blue milk. You know what I mean? Like, that's stuff like that you're just like, okay. I hated Reva, the third sister, whatever. But again, we'll get to these individual story points later. I want to talk about how we got to the Star Wars overload point and how that's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that's causing them more and more damage. So as you guys all know, Disney buys Star Wars. They're like, we're going to start pumping out movies. Force Awakens is a big hit, even though it's not very good. Rogue One comes out a year later. The idea is get a movie done every year. And we have to remember, in that business model, when that was started, Disney Plus did not exist. Star Wars was perceived as a theatrical experience, but they turned it into the Campbell's soup experience of just making it so common that it was like, I don't even care. And that became very difficult to right that ship if you ever screwed up. Hence, The Last Jedi. When you get to that point, like, that movie has fans for some reason, but I would say the majority of people that, were actual Star Wars fans going into it were kind of like, wow, I'm kind of done now, because that movie really wrecked everything. And then, not that Force Awakens was good, but it essentially highlighted the failures of The Force Awakens, because now The Force Awakens had no point. And then you get to Solo, which, as you pointed out, was the flop. It was also the most pointless side story you could have ever done. I mean, that might as well have been like the narrative in a spin-off like Star Wars fighting game. Like, we didn't need that to be a movie. And then that straight up was the only Star Wars movie in history to financially flop. Then they just kind of rolled the corpse out of Rise of Skywalker because they're like, it has to finish. And it wasn't good. And we have not seen a theatrical Star Wars release since. Nor is there even actually one like immediately on the horizon, like for the first time in a long time. In fact, here's a little fun fact for you. Since the 1970s, there's been at least one theatrical release of a Star Wars movie every decade. So far in this decade, there has not been one, and there's no immediate plans to release one because we are in the Disney Plus era. So you combine the failure is from Disney's perspective is, the theatrical movies don't work anymore, but we have to make content for our platform. People love this Mandalorian thing. That's making Star Wars successful. It's the reason that people like Disney Plus. Okay, put all that Star Wars energy into Disney Plus. So it's like Mandalorian came from a place of Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni being like, we feel passionately about this era of Star Wars that is not covered, and here's a specific story we want to tell in it. And to the point of Star Wars Overload, once they had a little bit of success, there was just, hey, make everything like that. So while I like Mando Season 2, a lot of people don't. You can look at Book of Boba Fett. It's like, it will do the Marvel thing. It'll connect with that. We'll roll the Mandalorian into it. Who cares if these parts don't make sense? Who cares if Boba Fett's like 60 years old and we're presenting him like he's 30? Who cares about all these like obvious flaws? We should really restructure. No, just put it out. We need content. And that's how you get to Obi-Wan, which was at one time supposed to be a movie, but they no doubt looked at their own box office records and went, that's not, we don't need it to do that. We'll put it on Disney Plus because then that's 6 guaranteed weeks of people coming back and staying on Disney Plus. Yeah, but we really only have like 3 episodes worth of content. And honestly, it should just be a movie. No, 6 weeks. It's good. It's fine. Just pad it out. So, Obi-Wan and everybody is going to be under threat. So Obi-Wan sacrifices himself so that everybody can escape. Well, let's do it again. How about the next episode he does the same thing? He has to sacrifice himself so everybody can escape. It's just you repeat a lot of plot points, and as Rob said, it's just pointless. It doesn't. Those elements don't need to exist. Hence, that's Star Wars Overload. You're getting too much content too quickly, and they're driven not by creative drive, but by corporate mandate. Not that Star Wars wasn't always a product, because it was, but I would argue A New Hope came from George Lucas's creative spark to build something. The Empire Strikes Back came from a place of let's build upon that. Admittedly, Return of the Jedi came a place on like, how many toys can we have? And obviously the prequels were all about toys. But, The Mandalorian at least came from a place of like, I want to tell this story in this universe. And I feel like every time Star Wars has like a legitimate success like that, corporate overlords, man, they can't help themselves. They try to emulate that success without ever understanding it. And now we're for the worse off, because Obi-Wan should have been the Solo movie. They should have made it back then. It should have been like this great story. And no, we got Solo, and now we have a very stretched out version of Obi-Wan that didn't need to exist. That's my take on Star Wars Overload. Now I'll get back to individual thoughts on Obi-Wan, but Keith, you take it away.
Yeah, when it comes to Obi-Wan, I must say I got around the Rob category of it being a nice solid B for me, but mostly because I just got to fanboy out at a bunch of places. They kind of build these things in these spots for us to fanboy out at. And I can't help it. I just like to see a lightsaber turn on. That's how happy I am about. That's how fanboy I am about Star Wars. So mainly, some of my high points mainly being the lightsaber fights, especially between Reva and Vader, was well choreographed, very well done. And I've heard from many sword experts was also very well done as well. So I was really, really happy to see those lightsaber fights out there and very prominent. And I must agree with Rob at the end of, I think it's like, like when he fights Vader for the last time in 6, and that last monologue that Hayden Christensen gives, and it gives an answer that I've always had to a question as a fan. And the question I've always had as a fan is always, when did Obi-Wan... When in episode 4, A New Hope, you hear Obi-Wan talk about Anakin Skywalker and how he was a friend. And the difference when he talks about Darth Vader, when he talks about him. And to see them as two different people, I never really saw that so much as when I did when when Hayden Christensen gave that monologue. So it was actually really helpful for me to see that for the first time. I really, really enjoyed Hayden Christensen saying, "You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did." And that was just, it also gave a lot more motivation to Obi-Wan, even in episode 4. To me, I think it actually built a lot of good motivation to Obi-Wan in episode 4, which is something I've always wanted, him being one of my favorite characters from the old series. And I'll never forget Alec Guinness's performance, who started it all and gave Ewan McGregor that great template. That's definitely a point I wanted to bring up for sure. When it comes to some of the acting, Reva was not my favorite when it came to acting wise. It seems like she was just like the one note, like I'm just kind of angry. And when they pulled that thing on her where she used to be a Padawan, it didn't seem to work out properly. I didn't see her motivation there properly. It was just all kind of one note. So I didn't really like that. If you were going to do something like that with the third sister, put a little bit more into it. I mean, obviously you got plenty of time to, talk about it and do some work with it. You got 6 episodes worth, might as well put some in there, I don't really need to see Obi-Wan escape the Empire and then escape the Empire and then escape the Empire. Oh, and then escape Darth Vader. I don't know. There was a lot of that. It seemed like they were just about to all get caught, and then Obi-Wan, I think like you said, Adam, you were saying now Obi-Wan had to sacrifice himself a bunch of times. That part was getting to me as well. But it was very enjoyable still to watch. The fan service they gave us was good. And honestly, the fake Jedi guy was kind of funny. I must say that. I like the fake Jedi. The guy who was kind of like posing as a Jedi. And the stuff he was using to fake the Force powers and whatnot. I thought that was interesting. What can I say? I thought it was funny.
So, all right. I guess I'll respond with what I actually thought of the show on a more individual level. First of all, because I just want to say this while I remember it, because you just mentioned that guy. My biggest issue with that character, I liked the idea that there could have been somebody being like, "Oh, I'm using, I'm pretending to be a Jedi because there's no one to disprove me." But you have to think about the universe in which this exists in. Jedis are like the most wanted people in the universe. And so that would be like me being like, I'm not affiliated with any sort of terrorist cell, but I'm going to act like I am. And it's like, what benefit does that have to me? It's just strange. I don't think that was like one of those things where I think on paper that probably read as like, ooh, that would be creative and interesting. Nobody's like that. But then you're not looking to the wider picture of like, well, that guy would be hunted and he has no skills anyway, so what's the point of that? Those are the kind of things where I kind of like it, and then I really don't when my analytical part of my brain analyzes it. But to go back a point, it's funny because as I said, I pitched an idea for an Obi-Wan show, or well, I should say movie, a while back. However, mine wouldn't have been exactly like this. I'm not saying I could have done it better, but from what I recall, and you're talking about something I haven't thought about in 6 years. But if I recall correctly, my basic idea was that Obi-Wan would have been a character who would have had the burden of the fall of the galaxy on his shoulders. So he would have been, a kind of a depressed, downward individual, kind of, and this is a bad comparison because it didn't work, but kind of the way that I think Last Jedi was trying to make Luke come off at first. Although that would have been more earned, unlike Luke being like, oh man, my school didn't work, I guess I'm depressed. It's this was a lot more significant. I also would have just naturally assumed Obi-Wan knew that Anakin became Vader and lived, or maybe he learns that throughout the course of it. That in my interpretation, he would have been aware or made aware, and so now he's even feeling worse about it because the galaxy continues to unravel and be destroyed because he showed sympathy when he really shouldn't have, in that sense. And then the majority of that film would have been him having to covertly protect Luke from some sort of outward threat, kind of like the reason Luke survives all the time in that terrible place is because, you know, Obi-Wan's been doing stuff without him realizing it. You know, like maybe there's a bunch of Tusken Raiders who are constantly attacking, and, you know, Obi-Wan has to prevent that from happening. Maybe that's why he eventually turns into the, I'm just going to say it because contextually he is, it turns him into the more racist Alec Guinness version, who doesn't refer to Tusken Raiders as Tusken Raiders, but Sand People. You know, like he says stuff like that in The New Hope. It's not, that's canon. So there's moments like that where, you know, you have that going on. Maybe he draws a little too much attention for one reason or another. And then there's this Imperial hunt, which would have been going on for quite some time for various Jedi, including Vader having a personal vendetta against Obi-Wan. But Obi-Wan is treated like a ghost. You know, he's treated, this is a bad historical parallel, but I think it'll paint that picture. He's treated kind of the way, you know, everybody treated Bin Laden. Like, he doesn't exist. Nobody knows where he is. It's impossible. Like, they could have, from an Empire perspective, you could have treated Obi-Wan kind of like that. And then eventually they either find him or they don't, and, you know, there's some sort of resolution there. But that was kind of the basic outline I would have had of that. And he would have had the only time in his history that Vader ever returned to Tatooine for one reason or another, which, you know, he never does in the original trilogy. And apparently after the events of was it Attack of the Clones, when he's on Tatooine and his mom dies, he never returns to that planet, ever. And so that doesn't get... I mean, this is partially the prequel's fault, because they don't explain that the reason he doesn't go there is because he's absolutely terrified of that planet. It makes him too emotional to basically function as Vader. He can't, his Anakin side can't help but come out. That's why he has, like, the giant palace on Mustafar. It's to constantly remind him how pissed off he is, so that he stays Vader. That's actually, like, the canonical explanation. But the show and the movies do not clarify that. That's really only done to the comics. But if you're making a new Obi-Wan narrative, you could do that. The idea of a Vader who's kind of broken and he's wandering around on Tatooine and gets emotional, and his Anakin side comes out would have been, I think, another interesting duality moment, similar to what we got at the end, where he's saying, "I'm not your failure, Obi-Wan," etc. But to make a point on that, while I'm with both of you that I think that moment, that sequence where they're talking at the end and he's switching between, you know, Hayden Christensen, James Earl Jones' voice and all that sort of stuff, I think that scene's incredible. There is one serious flaw with it that just creates a new contradiction, because the one it fixed was the idea that Obi-Wan was like, look, you know, a young pupil named Darth Vader just betrayed and, you know, murdered your father. That's literally what he told me. That's what he said to my face. That you fixed that. But now you create a continuity error with Return of the Jedi. At the end of Return of the Jedi, Vader is looking for Luke, like when they're lightsaber dueling, and he's like, "So, you have a twin sister. Obi-Wan's failure is now complete." Like, he refers to this all being Obi-Wan's fault in that same scene. So that means at some point throughout the original trilogy, Vader's opinion now shifts to it was Obi-Wan's fault. So whatever, we just have to accept that if we care about Star Wars continuity. So it's you know, whatever. You're trying to fix bugs in writing from movies that were like 40 years old. It happens. That said, my project obviously was not the one made, so let's talk about the one that was. You guys have talked all about it, and I agree with parts. I think we all kind of agree with a lot of the same stuff, as it probably would have worked better 2.5 hours. You can cut out a lot of stuff.
Actually, that's the first time I heard that, was when you... Actually, the first point... I wanted to make sure to say this. But,
Sure.
And again, sorry to interrupt. I know people don't like that. But, when you guys said it should be a movie, it actually hit me. That was the first time I realized that you guys were very, very correct. It would have made the best, like, 2.5 hour movie ever.
Yeah,
I just want to say that was such a good point to make, and I it's the first time I realized it was when you guys said it.
I did look it up. It's called the Patterson Cut. It is available if you Google it. I think you have to, like, go to this guy's website to watch it, because he doesn't want to, like, leak it. But
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna check this out, honestly. Like, I enjoyed the series, but I'm like, from all the flaws that we've kind of talked about, it's like I do want to see it as a movie.
the funny part is we haven't even gotten into those enough, other than the fact that it was padded out. But I mean, I don't mind continuing to go unless you guys have a point. I just wanted to talk about what was actually offered in the show that bothered me. I already talked about how I don't really like that there's the comedic Jedi, because that doesn't make sense. But whatever, it's funny, but we can ignore it, I guess. I hated Reva. Her character is way over the top. She's way too aware of things there's no way she should know. She's also the driving force behind the entire narrative. Obi-Wan is not the driving force in his own story, nor is he even necessarily the lead or the smartest character. We have to put this out there. Reva is the one who comes to Tatooine because she just, for some reason, knows there must be a Jedi there. And she has this convoluted plan to find Obi-Wan, even though it's barely established that she would even know who he is, or there's no real reason for her to search there, etc. Like, there's that other Jedi, and then he supposedly magically found out Obi-Wan, but I think there's a line in there where Reva's like, there's a connection to Obi-Wan. He's on Tatooine. I saw it in the Jedi archives or something. It's like, no, you couldn't have done that. That's not possible. Like the entire point of those archives is they're not accessible to people. Like, you can't just, I just read it like that's like me being like, no, I read it on the Pentagon archives. How would I have access to that? You know what I mean? Like, that's impossible. But anyway, so we just have to buy her one line to explain like how the story starts, which is, I really don't like that such a bad character is the driving force behind the entire narrative. But then her plan is extraordinarily convoluted. She is like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out Kenobi, and I'm pretty sure he's on this desert planet, but I don't know exactly where. I don't know how I know that, but I do. So what I'll do is I'll abduct the daughter of a random senator who I don't actually happen to know has a connection to Obi-Wan. But yeah, whatever, he does. That's great. Obi-Wan will get involved because, fortunately, the parents of the senator are complete idiots. The most logical thing that they could do is ask the Empire to intervene here, not a rogue Jedi. Keep in mind, at this point in time, Star Wars canonically, Bail Organa is a legitimate senator in the Imperial Senate. Like, he has 100% rights and capabilities to be like, yo, there was a bunch of thugs that stole my daughter. Can you, like, do something? You're the Empire. That's what should happen, like, logically. But instead, he's like, I don't want to draw too much attention. Why would you not want to? You have the entire force of the Empire to go hunt this down. That's what you should do. Because, like, Leia, it's not even like, if Leia has too much attention, people will figure out that she's, like, Vader's daughter. Why would they know that? Nobody knows that outside of, like, 2 people, and they're certainly not going to talk about it. By bringing Obi-Wan into the situation, you only increase the probability of that happening. It's all just kind of a bad excuse to just get Obi-Wan into a story, which was the whole point. You don't need that. And then like, that's why I said in my pitch version, you would never have done that to get him, like, off-world and doing all this other crap, but whatever. They wanted a Leia scene. I have to kind of disagree with you, Rob, when you said that you were, like, totally on board with the actress playing her. I think that when they wrote that, and when they had the actress, she did a fine job with what she was told to do. I'm not disputing her performance capabilities. But they probably told her, just watch A New Hope and just do what that Leia does. Which means Leia has 10 years of no emotional development. She's always just the same character, consistently. Which I don't like. She could have, like, learned lessons and changed and become... Because she should have maybe started off a little bit more prissy. That's somewhere that's negative. Maybe she starts more off like, what we would expect a queen to be like. And then over time realizes, like, you know what, helping the small guy is my thing. That's what I should be doing. That would have made her interesting and got her back to where she's ultimately supposed to be. That's a much better place than, like, she was always just like that.
Although there is a bit of character growth in that at the beginning, she actually trusts the Empire. She's like, do you know who I am? I'm like the princess of Alderaan, and I think it's when they're in, like, the back of the pickup truck, in that, what is that, the third episode, and she's like, oh, they're like stormtroopers, it's like they're here to help us or whatever, and he's like, no, it's like the Empire's bad. So it's like she does have that naivete to believe that it's like just because her father is a senator that like, yeah, the Empire is going to come and find her. Yeah.
And I think that could have been expanded. Hence, I think the Empire should have been the ones searching for her, because she would have been like, yeah, I trust the Empire. I'm always told I'm supposed to trust the Empire. And then you realize someone in the Empire is the one that did this to you. That creates a very deep-seated distrust. I think that would have been way more interesting. But then again, the problem is, well, then where's Obi-Wan in his own show? And I'm sure that's exactly what they thought, which tells you this was not the way to do this. But anyway, so, that I didn't like that. I could spend an hour rambling about how much I don't like Reva, but I'll just try and just shorten this a lot. I do not like that she was way too aware of everything, that she was a driving force behind every single thing. I didn't like her motives. I thought on paper the idea of a character who was a Jedi youngling who was trying to take revenge is cool, but it was done very poorly, because do you realize not once but twice she survived a lightsaber stabbing from Darth Vader and just walks it off? And one time she was a child. Did you guys think about that? Lightsaber stabbings
that
no
didn't make any
anymore?
sense to me much at all, especially the third stabbing. I thought that one was good.
I mean, that's my biggest problem. One of my bigger problems with like modern Star Wars is that they've utterly trivialized death. And it's like, everybody's going to come back, and nobody's really dead. Mace Windu fell off a fucking skyscraper with his hand chopped. Oh yeah, he's alive, and Boba Fett's alive, and Han Solo's alive, and everybody's fucking alive. And like, death means nothing, and like, lightsabers mean nothing.
That's really interesting. Think about where they started in Episode 4. From the first time we saw someone get hit with a lightsaber, they fucking like vaporized as far as we knew. We had no clue. I mean, the first time you ever saw someone get hit with a lightsaber, that's what happened. It's like, holy shit. But nowadays, it's like anything.
Incorrect. It is actually the wanted guy in 3 systems at the Tatooine.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah,
who
the guy
just,
gets his arm chopped off.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. My bad.
Fair, his
I guess someone killed by a lightsaber, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's... I don't like how weakened all that stuff is, and you know exactly why it is, because, again, A New Hope came from a place of creative interest and a spark and a grit that George wanted to make, and Disney wants it as a product. You can't, famously, as Harrison Ford once said about Return of the Jedi, you can't sell dead Han toys, so you can't kill these characters and then sell toys about them, which is always going to be a problem now. It's never not going to be a problem. They're just going to keep bringing everybody back. They even brought back, technically, they brought back Harrison Ford's Han Solo in Rise of Skywalker when that made less than no sense. But whatever, that's different debate altogether. So yeah, I hated Reva. I hated all of that. And then you have to get into stuff that I thought was cool, but overall hurts the tapestry. So like, I thought it was awesome seeing Vader like pull a ship out of the sky. Vader was like OP on a different level than we're used to seeing him at. And you can argue the production reason for that is like, we can do that now budget wise. In the 70s, he had to just kind of wave his hands around, and like that was what you were limited to. But then it creates like issues, like why didn't he hold the Millennium Falcon in A New Hope, or he was just like, whatever, I don't even care. Obi-Wan's chucking rocks like it's no big deal. It's like, I can understand if they have those capabilities, but it expends all their energy for a day or something like that. But now they're doing it so like it's a video game, and it's like, I'm not.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't your favorite Star Wars video game Force Unleashed?
Force Unleashed, but I also
Star Destroyer out of the sky.
Yes, but that I don't accept those events as canon. I'm not like, oh yeah, of course they can all do that. That's a video
but
game.
There's a suspension of disbelief. Like, you have to understand that.
Yes, I understand that within the context of a video game that I'm told is just, wouldn't this be a fun little adventure? As opposed to Obi-Wan, which I'm told like, no, this is actually what happens. Which means, why doesn't that happen again later? That's how content continuity is. You can't just introduce elements like that and then ignore them because you break movies. Hence the end of Last Jedi, where it's like, oh, we have this like lightspeed weapon now. It's like, okay, so all of Star Wars is destroyed in this process. You have to care about continuity, and with Star Wars, especially in the Disney era, that's like a Herculean task, man. But that's a different debate altogether. So I'm sorry, but we'll get it back on to point about Obi-Wan. I to give it a big positive point, I do think that Vader is done incredibly well. Aside from nitpicks like that, I think that the way his motivations are clear to me. His like why he'd be seething with hatred, like why he does everything he does, even when it's irrational to people around him. It makes complete sense to me. I think he was very good. Hayden Christensen was great. You know who doesn't get enough praise and absolutely should is James Earl Jones's performance in this.
Yeah.
Like, to be fair, I know they did some synth processing on him because he's like 95 years old or whatever. But if you compare his performance in this to Rogue One.
Yeah,
like
totally
Rogue
different.
One,
Yeah.
I remember listening to him being like, dude, they need to just get Matt Sloan, who is a buddy of mine who voices Vader, ironically in Force Unleashed. They're like, we need to get him to start doing Vader in the movies now because James Earl Jones doesn't sound like Vader anymore, based on his Rogue One performance. But
yeah, time's running out on that one.
Yeah, but Obi-Wan, based on that show, I was like, oh, dude, he's back. He's back on a big way. But again, some of that, probably the synth processing they did for him. Because that is a thing. You can look that up.
They did the same thing. I think I read that in Book of Boba Fett, Mark Hamill did not voice Luke Skywalker.
I don't think he had
that
anything to do
episode
with
that
it.
he's in. It's like he voiced him in Mandalorian, but not in Book of Boba Fett, and it was like done through like a speech generator with like Mark Hamill's like dialogue, kind of put in there.
Yeah, he can't hit that tone anymore. The years have taken the toll on his voice. He can't hit that young tone anymore,
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense. So it would not surprise me that was a big part of why James Earl Jones sounds so good in there. But we do know he at least recorded it. What it originally sounded like is another matter. But if they can make it sound like that, indefinitely, great. Vader's back. I'd love to see more of him. My only issue with Vader's storyline is kind of the way it ends, and this was a problem they ran into because it was like, how else do you end it? The end of that show almost ends exactly like Revenge of the Sith, in that like everyone just kind of goes back to status quo so they can wait for A New Hope to start. Like Obi-Wan goes back to Tatooine and he's like, okay, I got nothing to do. Luke's fine. All right, don't have to deal with that and whatever. Vader's like, okay, never mind. I won't deal with that. I'll just go back to dealing with business in the Empire. Oh, we're gonna build a Death Star. Cool, sounds good. Let's do that. Seeing Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor in there was pretty cool, although he looked a little weird. I think they did like digital makeup on him or something.
Yeah, the makeup was a bit off, yeah.
Yeah, it would not surprise me if he was not willing to do the makeup anymore. I know famously, if you look at the cover of Rise of Skywalker, you'll see Emperor Palpatine on it, but that's not actually Ian McDiarmid in a suit. That's actually one of the action figures in as a blow-up. I'm serious. That's what that is. And so he's apparently like kind of just done wearing the prosthetics and all that stuff. And I don't blame him. He's 70 something. And he's like, I unless there's like good reason. But yeah, he didn't do it for that. So I'm guessing he didn't do it for Obi-Wan either. That was, or they just did like, we'll do like a very quick one because it's something about it looked really just not right. But it was actually him. But yeah, it just kind of ends because it has to, and I don't want to get into the what ifs, but I feel like this could have been better had it been focused more on like Obi-Wan specifically and on the planet and with Luke, and I just didn't really see like we didn't really need a Leia adventure other than member berries. Like, it was cool to see Bail Organa, but like, I don't know, man. Like, we could nitpick this forever, but I've been talking way too much. You guys take it over.
It was very surprising when I first watched the series and the whole thing didn't take place on Tatooine. I did actually think that was weird when I first saw it. When I actually saw Obi-Wan go out into the galaxy, like, how can this guy go out in the galaxy? Isn't like anybody gonna notice like that guy's around? Because he was so wanted and whatnot. So I had a little trouble with that. I suspended a lot of disbelief just to go on a fun adventure with Leia.
Although I will say, I mean, goddamn, everything takes place on Tatooine now, so I was just happy to get off that fucking planet for a change.
Well, yeah,
it's
but
like
then where we
Boba
go?
Fett's on
Coruscant?
Tatooine, and Mandalorian's visiting Tatooine every other week, and it's just like, give me something else. Like,
Okay.
So I actually did like a lot of the other locales, that they brought on. I really liked that kind of Blade Runner planet, which was pretty cool. They even brought that water planet with like the Inquisitor base on it was actually taken straight from Jedi Fallen Order, the video game. So like I liked that they were bringing in like some other planets than fucking Tatooine. It's like the most inconsequential planet in the galaxy. That's its point.
No, see,
that's why fucking Obi-Wan's hiding there. And it's like, we've done it to death. Yeah.
I'll give you a point on that one because I think you're right. It's nice to see it vary up a bit. Although it's clearly not the most inconsequential. It's to Star Wars what 1955 is to Back to the Future. It's just like everything has to kind of circle around that
back to Tatooine,
area. Yeah, it's always back to Tatooine. But I think that's a valid point, Rob. I'll give you that one. Actually, speaking of that water planet and other things that happen around that, so people were talking about, do you guys remember there's like a bit where they go and they see like the bodies of a bunch of like frozen Jedi?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to touch on this briefly because I've seen people talking about this being like, what is this? This is something that you would only really know if you're either like a super Star Wars fan or if you at least have watched Star Wars Rebels, because Star Wars Rebels actually has an episode specifically about this. In Star Wars Rebels, which takes place like 5 years after this show takes place, it's revealed that one of the Empire's tactics for luring out Jedi was they were keeping like the corpses of other Jedi in not a suspended animated state, but at least in like a suspended state where they're dead, but they're slowly rotting. Therefore, they're still giving off like a signal. If you're a Force user, you can still sense them. The idea was to kind of trap other Jedi and use them as bait to be like, oh wait, Master Syndulla is still alive, like, let me get over there, and then they try to rescue him only to find out they've been trapped, and that was kind of a way of basically bait for other Jedi. So that I think is interesting, although what scares me is the possibility that, as Rob was pointing out, what if death is suddenly meaningless and all of a sudden everybody's like, hey, Mace Windu's in here, let's unfreeze him, and now we have, more Jedi, and all the characters can just come back. I really don't want that. If it sticks to its like Star Wars Rebels origin, I like that. But the thing that scared me is how many of those, like, all the ones they showed were all totally like non-significant characters. So that was a little weird. But hopefully they elaborate on that.
Yeah, definitely interesting for sure. I mean, there's I wanted to ask a question. Like, I didn't really play Fallen Order, but also isn't that the resistance or whatever to like get Force sensitive kids away? Isn't that like part of the game as well? The one from the show.
That's a thing in general.
Okay.
That since the Empire took over, like, okay, so what happens? All right, there's too much lore here, but we'll go through this quickly. In general, when Force-sensitive children were essentially detected, the Jedi Order would go and find them and more or less take them back to the Jedi Order to basically train them as Jedi, because if they were kind of left to their own devices, that's essentially how the Sith got out of control, because then you have people with power that think, with no training, that think they're exceptional, and that leads to inevitable dark side problems. So that became the Jedi policy. As creepy, as weird as it is, it's like it's the least of all evils, because we just have to live in that X-Men like world where it's like, okay, well, we have to train these people. When the Jedi fell, it became Imperial policy that if you detect any one of those kids, you're pretty much supposed to kill them, unless you think you can train them. This is a new Disney era thing, unless you think you can train them as an Inquisitor, because there can never be more than 2 Sith. That's like the old George Lucas rule. So the only way they could have other bad guys is that they don't call them Sith. They call them, Inquisitors, which is exclusively a Disney era creation. And that's why you have people like Riva and all the others that are just like, hey, we were Force-sensitive kids, but the Empire found us and trained us to be basically like Nazi foot soldiers. Whatever. So that seems to be their continued policy.
Yeah, that is a way to get around the
does
rule,
that answer your
too.
question?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, you know what we should talk about, guys? The very ending. Like with Liam Neeson.
Oh, yeah, actually getting to see Liam Neeson there and to start the path of Obi-Wan to learn the powers that other Jedi can learn very easily later on. Right?
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about that is, like, I see people online like, Obi-Wan Season 2? What's it gonna be? And I'm just like, it's just gonna be Obi-Wan sitting in a fucking cave, like, talking to Liam Neeson's ghost for 6 episodes. Like, honestly, it would still be a better movie than Han Solo. But it's there's not going to be a season 2 of this. There can't be.
Yeah, I really, let's take that into 2 parts. First, I agree with Rob. You really should not do a second season of this.
Yeah.
Just because you know what would be an interesting narrative would be the training process and all that sort of stuff, and whatever. They won't do that. What they'll do is, if they make one, they'll be like, guys, Luke was abducted for some reason. We have to rescue him. Like, it'll be the same story, just with a different character. And then, it won't be what you want. It'll be too long. It'll be 6 parts, and when it could have been 2. And we already know how this movie goes, literally. So let's not.
Yeah.
But,
no need for them to go out in the galaxy, then go back and wait for episode 4. They're set up. They're ready for episode 4. Just let them wait.
Or worse yet, do an entire fucking Tatooine story, because I'm fucking sick of Tatooine.
More Tatooine now!
Yeah, but I will say, we've already gotten kind of the closer to the end point of Obi-Wan's life on Tatooine in another show, which was animated,
Rebels,
which is
Rebels.
Rebels did the episode where Obi-Wan is there and he kills Darth Maul, which is, for my money, one of the best fucking. I think might be the best thing Rebels ever did. Mm-hmm. Was that episode on Tatooine and that confrontation between Maul and Obi-Wan. Like, there's so much depth there.
That tells you how good it is that you like a Tatooine story.
Yeah, but it's like, that's the one exception.
But funny enough is I thought that was going to be the tying off of Obi-Wan for good. I actually didn't think they were going to do anything else. I thought that was going to be it.
That's another reason they can't do another season of Obi-Wan, because a lot of people are like, oh, well, Darth Maul's going to come back. It's like, you haven't watched the cartoons. Like, those are canon. You don't have to like them or watch them. They're actually phenomenal. I would say they're some of the best Star Wars content out there. But a lot of people don't watch them simply because they're animated content. But the whole Darth Maul storyline, completely resolved in that show. It's actually vastly more interesting than his Phantom Menace presence. But it's done. Like, there isn't much else you can do.
We don't care what you saw at the end of Solo.
Yeah, I mean, well, he was alive.
Solo takes place before.
Exactly. I'm just saying you're not going to see him in live action again. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Although I will say, just to a bit of a roundabout thing. I know Adam is like stubbornly refuses to watch any new Star Trek, but there's something called short treks. Short Treks is basically this like little mini series, a kind of anthology series that they've been doing, where it's like 5 to 10 minute little mini self-contained stories in the Star Trek universe.
Yep.
Like they did one about Harry Mudd. They did one about this like animated one about a tardigrade. It's really, really cute. So yeah, they need a Star Wars version of Short Treks. Short Wars, I don't know. And give me Ray Park and Ewan McGregor redoing that scene in live action. That's all I want.
That would be actually really nice, yeah.
No need to make an entire fucking second season of Obi-Wan. Just give me a 5-minute short film.
Would be.
They should do that for a lot. Yeah, you're right. Star Wars shorts would be really good. You can do a lot of different things.
Well, ironically, they've already done the reverse. They've done like animated, like things like was it Legends of the Force or something like that. They have a bunch of stuff on Disney Plus where it's like they'll retell a story like in animated form, you know, they can elaborate on a little bit more. So it's like, yeah, just do the reverse. Just give me a 5-minute short film of Ray Park and Ewan McGregor in the middle of the night in the desert.
I think that's a really good idea, but to expand on it, rather than just being like a one-off where they tell that specific story, it would be really nice if basically Jon Favreau sat down with Dave Filoni. They went through everything in Clone Wars and in Rebels and said, which are the most like essential things that we need people to remember? Because the problem with those shows, again, they're animated, but especially because Dave Filoni did them, and he's also doing all the Mandalorian stuff, and he does Book of Boba Fett. Unfortunately, he kind of creates those shows with the expectation that you've seen all the animated stuff, and clearly people haven't. Hence, Cad Bane was so like, who is this? When you saw Book of Boba Fett, because he had only ever existed in an animated form. I think your idea, Rob, of taking just take those big best parts, the most significant things, and recreate them into like little live shorts and call it Star Wars shorts or whatever you want to call it. Go out and film the Obi-Wan meets Darth Vader fight, or Darth Maul fight. Go out and meet, like, you know, Cad Bane when he escaped from prison and whatever. All the highlight things that you feel the audience needs to know for your ongoing storytelling, but is exclusively that live action audience. That's a good Star Wars show premise, because you can recycle material you already know works and still make bank on it.
Oh yeah.
So the moral of the story is Star Wars overload is a serious problem. Give us more Star Wars so we can fix it.
Yeah, don't you understand what we want here? No, we just want shorter Star Wars to fix the larger Star Wars problem.
Honestly, yeah. Give us short Star Wars, please.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just like one last thought for me on like the concept of Star Wars overload. It's present, but I don't think it's anywhere near the burnout that I feel with the MCU. Like I'm fucking done with the MCU. I'll see like one movie like every 2 years. Like I'm gonna wait to see Love and Thunder, Thor. Until it comes
I've
out.
seen it. So.
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait. I don't need to drag my ass to a theater to go see that. You know, it's yeah. But Star Wars. If there was a Star Wars movie that came out, I'd probably still go see it.
So this is a whole separate discussion, so we should keep this very brief. I'm kind of with you, but that's mostly because, with the exception of Spider-Man, MCU Phase 4 has really sucked. Like, if you
Eternals
look
at
Eternals is unwatchable.
I don't care.
I was on a flight. I think it was on my flight to Dublin a month ago, and the woman sitting near me put on Eternals specifically because she wanted to fall asleep. Like, it's like ASMR level.
Oh, yeah, that'll work.
And so, yeah, that's not a good sign. But the behind the scenes of that is basically Kevin Feige has very little to do with Phase 4, and it's like, when the adults are away, the children will play. Like, basically, you have other people being like, oh, here's my agenda, and it's like, no, but you don't have an overall tapestry idea. It doesn't matter. Let's ruin characters. That's a different story.
Well, I mean, I was getting burned out in Phase 3. Phase 4 was just the nail in the coffin. You know?
I wasn't, but I am with you in that, like, I'm kind of like, oh, Thor's out? whatever. Miss Marvel's out? Whatever. What was the Moon Knight or whatever his name is? I already forgot the name of the character. I haven't even watched it yet.
And the Shang-Chi and the
I did watch that, but
the 7 plot devices. I don't know. It's
there was
I don't care.
They've got She-Hulk coming out pretty soon and a bunch of other junk.
Yeah, so that's a different thing. With
Wars, back to Star Wars though. Like, what is on the horizon for Star Wars? There's an Ahsoka series, I believe.
Yes,
yeah, there's a whole
Mandalorian season 3.
Yeah, so that's where we're at though. Is like I was saying before, all the stuff that's coming up, they're kind of doing the Marvel let's tie all these like TV shows together thing, which is not bad in concept, but it is bad when you stretch out the material and you don't have enough material to do that. But there is no theatrical experience coming up that I'm aware of. I think the last one we heard about that actually had some legs was Patty Jenkins' ill-fated Rogue Squadron, that I think was supposed to be 2025 and now is just like off the slate. I don't think.
I think there's a Taika Waititi helmed Star Wars.
there's a
out.
project in
Is
the
it a
works.
movie or another Disney Plus show?
You know what? Although you know what's the one that they fucking swept the fuck under the carpet was Ryan Johnson's separate trilogy. Do you remember that?
Oh, of course
Oh
I
my
do.
god,
Right.
that was just a complete. Oh my god, that was a whole thing for speculation and hype train up the wazoo and nothing.
No, gone.
You know that simply Ryan Johnson actually talked about that in an interview, like when it first happened, and it was as simple as Kathleen Kennedy liked working with him. Wonder why. But you know, she had a corporate mandate from Disney, like we need a new movie like every year. And even though I think she sucks at that job and everything, that's a lot of pressure to put on the head of a studio to be like, you need to give us a giant $1 billion theatrical film every year until you die. Which is, you know, like that's so when Ryan Johnson's like, man, I really like making Star Wars. She's like, do you want to make 3 more? Okay. Like that's probably as far as that went, according to Ryan Johnson. It was just like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. And that was before it came out, and of course nobody would let him do that. But she just had a mandate to fill slots. And the Star Wars kind of fatigue from the overload set in, and now they calmed it down a bit. But it's ramping back up because Mandalorian was such a big hit, but now it's kind of ramping up in the wrong direction. We already talked about
shit! Yeah, we have that Cassian Andor.
Andor's coming out too. I forgot about that one. I always felt like that was supposed to be a movie for some reason. I always felt like Andor was supposed to be a movie, but then they decided to change it into a series. But I'm not sure.
Yeah. Like I said,
are they still doing that Resistance animated show too?
I think that last.
I never watched that one. I've never seen it.
I have never met anyone who's seen that.
It's leading up to like the new stuff, which I don't give a shit about.
Well, it takes place in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, fuck that shit.
Which, nobody cares about that, and I'm glad that doesn't exist. Like, you could wipe that out of continuity, and nobody would even know.
No, that's one of the few trilogies right there you could wipe out, completely redo, and every single person would be okay with it.
It's not even a trilogy. It's 3 movies we're told canonically connect to each other. You know, somebody said something to me a couple weeks ago that like kind of blew my mind. Like, go back and watch Rise of Skywalker in your head for a second, and at the end, instead of like when Rey dies and then like Kylo Ren heals her and then he dies. Imagine for a second he tries to heal her and he can't, but he ends up living. Now the rest of the movie, the ending with the Tatooine and the lightsaber, that's all Kylo Ren. That movie improves like tenfold because then Rey all of a sudden had a point. She was someone from nothing who sacrificed herself to save the universe. Kylo was redeemed in the process, and he is the Rise of Skywalker. Goes for family legacy. All of a sudden, the movie, it's not good, but all of a sudden, it's like it just got 10 times better because you just swapped 2 characters. And then somebody pointed that out. I was like, damn it, how did that not get made that way?
It's just like, wow. You hear that and you're just like, I would have actually left the theater probably like slightly happier.
Yeah, or less pissed off. I mean, that's reason,
less pissed. Yeah,
it feels like that's how it was written too, because at the end Rey has that like yellow lightsaber that just like looks out of control. It's like, wouldn't that make sense for Kylo, the guy who made the childish red one, to have something like that? No, it's just Rey. She's just so good. She can just do everything she wants. I hate that movie so much.
I mean, she would have had a whole reason for her character to exist. I mean, she would have done something. I mean, holy crap! Sorry, man, this is blowing my mind. So
exactly. Like, it doesn't fix what again they call a trilogy, but it we all sit there and we look at these things, and it's like, how could you screw that up so bad? Any one of us could have told you. Writing out a trilogy as a game of Mad Libs is not a good idea, but that's what they did anyway. But we got to get back around to Obi-Wan specifically. So the last thing I want to say about this was just that it was very cool seeing Liam Neeson in there. I think we all kind of saw that coming. They kind of ruined that in the intro of the first episode when he basically says like, for you, training on the planet I have for you. It's like, your old master Qui-Gon, I will teach you how to commune with him. I'm like, okay, so you just like revealed the very end of the show in the intro. Like, I get they did that in case people didn't go back and watch Revenge of the Sith, but that irked me a little. Anything else?
Nah, yeah. It was great to see him. Liam Neeson looked great. You know, it worked for what they did. It was overall, it was all right. But again, the overload is starting to push up.
Yep. All right. If there's no other thoughts, then I guess that's the end here. So, to give a big shout out here to Spencer per year for Star Wars Overload, and Keith, of course, for you for wanting to talk Obi-Wan in general. Big shout outs to, of course, Abdullah for joining us earlier, Joseph for joining us earlier, Chuck, as always, for the subject, and shout outs to Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Thank you guys, everybody, for being a Patreon supporter or just listening and enjoying the podcast. As always, you can join up on Patreon if you haven't done that, and get involved. Thank you, Rob, for still existing. He got sick in Alaska. Everybody, he's here. He's fighting it off, and he helped us with the show. So thank you, Rob.
Made it through the storm.
Thank you, Adam.
Good job, man.
Oh yeah,
yes,
and his power didn't go out, which is nice. So, all right, thank you guys, everybody, for listening, and please like, comment, subscribe, check out all the social media stuff in the description. As always, thank you very much, and we'll see you all later.